Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I've used the same settings as yesterday. This is a video I really wanted to make, though I'm not sure how much I'm gonna like it. I have not prepared for it the way I usually do. Usually when I know something is very information dense and somewhat contemptuous for given my history with it, I usually check out the video in full, basically do a pre-watch. I did not do it today because, as you could have guessed, I am pretty busy, but with nice personal stuff. So I'm feeling well. I'm having time. But obviously, the streams are a very, very nice diversion. I didn't want to ruin my mood by watching Geekerwan before the stream. I had hoped that I would be able to go through it with you guys, see what you think, see where maybe you can guide me to be like a little bit more positive towards Geekerwan. Let me just briefly. It isn't transparency. Apple has tuned the transparency mode on their AirPods Pro recently. It just feels a little bit more occlusive than it usually did. I don't know. So, guys, what are we talking about today? For one, cheers, because I'm incredibly freaking thirsty. And we are talking about this. We are talking about Geekerwan's latest analysis on Apple's latest chip. Now, this is on their original channel, so this is obviously not in English, but we are watching this with subtitles. Hopefully, you can follow along. Hopefully, I can follow along. This does mean that I might be less inclined to check out the live chat right next to me on my iPad, because I will have to be checking out, obviously, what exactly he is saying. Now, I do have a little bit of a history with Geekerwan. I have criticized them for some testing methodology, like using liquid nitrogen cooling on mobile devices that are very much tuned towards like thermal goals, and sometimes if you cool a processor too much, it can run at extremely high clock speeds or even at supposedly high utilization rates, but doesn't actually give you more performance because the actual architecture was never built for those high clock speeds, or even just like the extreme high voltages that are running through it, that can run through it because it's such is so well cooled. I've criticized them for the way they single out like single core power usage. I've always said that they are very likely measuring like millisecond long spikes that don't actually reflect even peak performance, peak power usage, which, for example, if you follow the PC master race stuff, you will find that like the RTX 4090 absolutely can peak into the 600 watt range. Now it's rated as a 450 watt card, and usually it will actually stay around 350 to 400 watts in actual usage. So that's a 50 to maybe 30% increase in wattage. And you would be like, well, does that mean NVIDIA lied to us? Well, no. Momentary spikes in power consumption are pretty normal for every architecture. If you look at the 4900K, that's like a 200 watt GPU at like max power consumption. You will have spikes where it goes up to 400. And even if you can like really still get some usage out of it at 300, it really won't scale once you go up with liquid nitrogen towards 400. This is why I've always said artificial cooling usually gives you somewhat artificial results unless a chip was specifically designed and even like validated for that. But then we're usually talking about like, is the chip actually good in terms of silicon lottery and whatever. So it's not really a game you want to play with like an iPad. And of course, small results, you actually need to know when to isolate certain numbers, certain data, and throw it out. If like 95% of your peak power usage sits at like 8 watts, and then you get one sudden spike at 11 watts, and then maybe it stabilizes for a little bit at like 9 watts, right? Now your peak power consumption still realistically is 8 watts, and even on average it still is more like 8.5, maybe 9, even when you account for those spikes. But using those spikes is using worthless data that a good a statistician would be able to isolate and delete. Knowing when to get rid of data is not lying. That shows that you have actual expertise in what you're doing. And sometimes eliminating the very best results or the very worst results is kind of fundamental to a good analysis. And to me, I don't think that this is happening with Geekerwan. And ironically, the outlet that convinced me of that is Geekerwan, because when Geekerwan gave us certain GPU power consumption numbers, and they were like in the 11 watt range or whatever, even for like the A17 chip or whatever. And then they gave us a game where the CPU is actively used, where the GPU is actively used, where you even have like the display running and whatever. And suddenly we were at like a combined SoC power draw of around 6 watts. I just didn't believe that. Aryan Singh leaving a couple of emojis, some laughing, some smiling. Welcome to the chat, brother. I don't think I've seen you yet here. As always, by the way, we're now a couple of minutes into the stream. I do want to tell you, it helps me if you, of course, subscribe if you enjoyed the content, please like, please share, please comment, and if you feel like supporting me directly, leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, or consider subscribing to my Patreon. You can find the link in the description of this channel. So there is a lot that I didn't like about Geekerwan. And when I say about like, well, they had like 11 watt peaks for like the GPU or whatever, maybe it was like 9, 10 watts. But then like the GPU, like the combined SoC draw was suddenly 6 watts during actual gaming when combining CPU and GPU. And I know you can run like a power virus like test that really gives you like high power consumption, but that really is not indicative of how you use, especially those mobile chips. Chipomaster. It looks like most of the power efficiency gain is the Tandem OLED over M4. When do you think we get Tandem OLED Max? It seems like the biggest rumor about that points towards it being late 2026 or sometime 2027. The supply just has to be there. Like supposedly there will be like one Dell device getting Tandem OLED. We don't know if Apple plans on using it for anything besides like larger devices. Maybe they would use it for like an iPhone Ultra or whatever. Also, by the way, Tipomaster, if you are downplaying the M4's efficiency gains, you are sadly mistaken. Like everything that I've seen about this chip besides this, and the fact that Apple rates it for M2 peak power, M2 peak performance at half the peak power draw of the M2, that is a giant leap that far outpaces anything that you would expect just going from N5P to N3E. So this is really a benefit of Apple's architectures, the use of newer efficiency cores, newer architectures, system optimization. You just cannot say, oh, there is no efficiency gain because at the highest peak, those highest peaks, I will go into that. I have seen some numbers like 11 and 17 watts that those guys have provided, and I will absolutely stand by the fact that those peak numbers are just like 60. Whenever we see like 65 watt signal core power consumption on the desktop, right? It's not really indicative of actual like power consumption in that regard. Not employing M4 per se, but the mini LEDs seem to suck a lot of power, even comparing the M2 Pro to the M2 Air. Well, yeah, of course, the mini LED was consuming more power. This is why Apple actually increased the battery capacity on the LCD 11-inch iPad Pro, and why they actually felt comfortable, to say it that way, in slightly reducing the battery capacity on the 13-inch model. By the way, guys, I've noticed that last video, I speak a little faster and I breathe a little more shallow. That's because I have a little bit of an allergy against my mom's cat. My nose is a little bit closed, so please forgive me if I I also need to shout a little more so the microphones on my laptop pick me up because I don't have my Blue Yeti microphone. Oh, by the way, guys, a real shout out to the supporters of this channel. Like, if you really want to support this channel, I plan on getting a new high quality microphone. And if you want to support me in doing that, please leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, or consider subscribing to my Patreon. That will be money that flows directly to the channel and hopefully to a better experience for you guys. Okay, so without further ado, I think I've given enough of a foreplay. I think we can start. Again, as I said, this is with subtitles, so prepare for me to be a little bit more captured on this screen than I usually am, but I still want to react to chats, to comments. I do like me a lively live chat and, of course, hearing your guys' opinions. Let's get started. As always, please let me know if the audio and video quality is working all right for you. You guys know I tend to get a little paranoid about that.
没想到啊，这 M3 呢才刚刚推出半年啊，这个月 M4 就已经来了，而且最离谱的是，它居然是首发在 iPad 上。我本来以为作为一个仅仅相隔半年推出的新处理器，它或许只是 M3 加强 NPU 换上 N3E 工艺的版本啊。
That was actually my thought. When we started getting like more substantial rumors about M4, I was like, oh, maybe this is like an N3E variant of the M3, and maybe it's just simply like using the same neural engine from the A17 Pro, which obviously the M3 didn't get. But no, it got a substantial new CPU architecture. The GPU was differently clocked, which obviously benefits mostly from the N3E process. So yeah, it was a pretty substantial update.
但实际上呢，经过这几天的测试 ，M4 已经向我们证明了它是值得拥有一个新名字的。虽然呢，它现在还禁锢在 iPad Pro 的小身板里啊，但这并不影响我们通过各种方法来了解它的架构、性能和能效。那这次测 M4 呢，我其实主要想了解两件事情啊。一是通过测试它的新架构，来看看苹果今年的性能上限如何。
Let me see. I think I'll keep it for now at 1 speeds, right? Guys talking relatively fast. We have to go through subtitles. I don't see a reason to speed it up for now.
包括未来的新 Mac 甚至新的 iPhone 有多大的潜力。第二呢，是作为全世界首颗 N3E 工艺的芯片，它的能耗表现如何啊？因为今年年底各家的手机芯片都会使用 N3E 工艺来制造，那这也可以从侧面为今年年底的手机芯片进步做一个预期。
I wouldn't put too much into that. For one, this is a comparison between N3E and N3B. Nobody else uses N3B. We don't know like how much Apple's exact architecture, like how much exactly Apple's architecture contributes to the efficiency here. So trying to isolate it for just the N3E node, especially given different clock speed targets, different memory bandwidth, I wouldn't put too much. Yes, Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, the MediaTek Dimensity 9400 will all be using that node. Samsung will be using on their latest node. So we might get like a comparison between nodes more, but I would say like comparing completely different CPU architectures on new nodes, and then even like different devices where like there's technically no M3 iPad to compare this against. I don't know. I wouldn't put too much analysis into like, oh, how much comes from the node and how much comes from the architecture. I would just always take them as a package.
那今天我们为大家带来了大量的实测，不仅会详细解析 M4 的架构和新特性，还有详细的能耗表现、基准测试以及搭载 M4 芯片的 iPad 的游戏性能。
By the way, like since they've launched this, there is a new 3D Mark test, and that test is actually way more in line with what we see from actual games. Like in this test, the A17 Pro actually outperforms the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which it does not in 3D Mark Wildlife, and especially not in GFX Bench. And in this test, I believe the Exynos 2400 actually comes out slightly on top with its RDNA 3 based architecture, GPU architecture, which does make sense because obviously AMD has a lot of expertise, but also because the peak power consumption of the GPU of the Exynos 2400 is significantly higher than that of the A17 Pro. Even if you account for like the different nodes, like between like the Samsung 4nm and TSMC N3B, even if you try to account for that by like 20% difference or whatever, you will still find that there's a lot more power given to that chip. This is partially why it actually wasn't that well cooled originally. Like, I believe they tuned power consumption a little bit over time on the latest Galaxy. So yeah, it's actually quite interesting, and those results now line up far. I believe the test is called Steel Nomad, and I would like to look into it once we have a lot more results, and maybe we'll have like websites like Notebook Check integrated into like their comprehensive testing. Once again, I want to point out how unfortunate it is that we have basically lost an Antec as like a really great reviewer, but it is what it is. We kind of have to live with that. I hope that somebody else comes and takes their place. I do not feel comfortable in Geekerwan being that, but maybe somebody else.
和续航表现，这期视频的信息量绝对是爆炸的，相信我，好饭绝对不怕晚。那么话不多说，咱们直接开始。首先，先来跟我简单了解一下新的 M4到底是个啥玩意儿啊？那苹果在发布会上说，这颗处理器用的是台积电的第2代3纳米工艺制造。那其实这就是指 N3E 工艺啊，它也成为了第一颗使用 N3E 工艺制造的处理器。理论上来说啊，应该会比 M3 使用的 N3B 工艺有更高的。
I like I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of a wording way, but yeah, in theory, TSMC promises that you can get a little bit more performance out of N3E versus N3B, but that depends a little bit on your architecture, because technically N3B is more dense than N3E. So it will vary from chip to chip and how you optimize it actually for the node itself. Tipomath saying, you're sad about the Nantec 2. You were excited to see Anand in an Apple video recently with Brian Tong. Oh, that's cool. Didn't notice that. I wish pop into the forums and say what's up in his life. Yeah, I kind of didn't follow up with that, but yeah, obviously those guys have to go somewhere. And the Nantec obviously by itself still exists. They just don't do anywhere near the testing they used to, especially when it comes to mobile stuff.
性能上限。那 CPU 部分呢？苹果在发布会上再次提到了大核的架构改进。
Yeah, we don't know. By the way, like I believe that they will claim, and I've seen other claims that the M3, the M4's processor goes from a 9 decode on the M3 to a 10 decode on the M4, which is insane. Like nobody in the industry comes even close. But I don't know if it's true. Sometimes they make those kinds of analysis a little bit prematurely. Again, I don't want to deny that, but Apple did say improved branch prediction, so that would line up with that and wider decode and execution engines, because those things have a good synergy with each other. And Apple seems to have improved the efficiency cores in lockstep, which, by the way, if you look at older like Snapdragon parts, you will find that their performance cores have a wildly different architecture from their E-cores, and this is why some tasks just weren't able to be transferred from the P-cores to the E-cores, and that could cause some software issues. Of course, on the Windows side, that was way more of a problem for Intel, that had an even wider disparity between its E-cores and its P-cores, but Apple seems to really be obsessed with keeping their performance and their efficiency cores relatively close. Like, if their performance cores are now ARM v9 and support like scalable matrix extensions, which was like a whole controversy around the latest Geekbench 6 results, it seems like their E-cores have the same capabilities. Because for one, the scaling and multi-threading is pretty great, and secondly, which wouldn't be the case if the efficiency cores weren't able to pick up where the P cores basically left off. But beyond that, I would just also say that the way that Apple just targets them in the same way, right? And describes this improved branch prediction, deeper. They say here deeper execution engine rather than wider, and they do have the same next gen ML accelerators, or they both have improved ML accelerators. So that's quite interesting. YouTube Kalanchisi joined in chat, one of our most long-term viewers and one of our most engaged commenters. There are some doubts raised about how quickly they seem to be able to lay out these core architectures. I agree. The diagrams, with people saying it should take a lot longer than just a couple of days to make sure about all of those details. I agree. And the problem is I don't see them doing like a lot of follow-up. Like I occasionally look up their channel and stuff like that. But like it's not like they will like fact check themselves a couple of weeks or months later or something like that. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's not like even a specific doubt towards Geekerwan. I would doubt anyone, well, besides Apple, because they obviously do have internal schematics. If somebody came out and like 1 or 2 weeks later was like, oh yeah, we do know how wide the decode engine is and whatever, and just exactly how they change the branch prediction algorithms and the hardware behind it. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
只是相比较于 M2 它进一步加宽了啊，8成就是 M3 的马甲嘛啊。然而后面的架构分析你就会看到，并不是这样的。M4 又对微架构进行了一次调整啊，考虑到它和 M3 推出的时间仅仅相隔了半年啊，这个研发效率我觉得是有点东西的。并且这次的
What I do like about Geekerwan though is they genuinely seem to be excited about what they're talking about, and they do give Apple credit, even though a lot of people use their videos to not give Apple credit. We have analyzed some of those guys on this channel, but they will say like, oh, it's impressive that Apple has like a very regular upgrade schedule. Oh, it's impressive that Apple actually changes the core architecture again and again, and stuff like that, right? One thing I want to criticize, and this is like M4 is not clocked at 4.5 gigahertz, it's clocked at 4.4. I know that they have brought it to like 4.47. That's probably with liquid nitrogen cooling. That's not realistic. It's a 4.4 gigahertz chip. It's fine to call it as such.
峰值频率啊，也是在被动散热设备当中前所未有的高啊。我们实测它可以在单核负载下最高跑到4.5 G 赫啊。更离谱的是，小核居然也已经跑到了2.88 G 赫。那这个频率已经达到了英特尔这代酷睿 Ultra 5的水平啊。
The frequency of the efficiency cores is now approaching like M1 territory, which is quite insane. Now their IPC will still be a lot lower than an M1, even at the same performance, at the same frequency, because obviously they have a lot less cache, there's a lot less like voltage that can even be given to them, but it's still like very interesting to see just how much the E-cores have evolved.
那这颗 CPU 出现在被动散热的 iPad Pro 上，属实是有点离谱了。那对于 iPad 来说，这个频率也确实是前所未有的。那 GPU 方面呢，它基本上就是 M3 GPU 的小幅优化版本。那频率呢，从 1.34 G 赫提频到了 1.47 G。
Yeah, okay, that mostly makes sense. It's basically an exact 10% increase, right? And we see like 15 to 20% increases in a lot of benchmarks. That would be like a mix of the 10% clock speed increase plus, I would say, the 20% increase in bandwidth. So those things usually contribute somewhat equally to the increase. So 10% there, 20% there, around 15% on average is an increase. Makes kind of perfect sense to me.
那么也许呢，苹果会对它做一些小优化，但理论上同频性能应该不会有什么明显的区别。那另一方面呢是 NPU 的加强，那这次啊，苹果算是第一回大量在自己的发布会里提及 AI 啊
AI using AI
features, AI workloads.
Yeah, AI is a silly word. Machine learning was a much better word, and actually see some people online actually like kind of agreeing with that, because the term AI is like easy to confuse with like generative AI, and now it's general AI with general intelligence. So yeah, machine learning just for everything that's like based on how your CPU can learn how your chip can learn stuff by itself, machine learning, in my opinion, was always a better term.
更是火药味。
So I won't be doing too many notes, I think, but like questionable how quickly they get a core architecture diagrams.
十足的宣称自己的 NPU 性能强于目前市面上所有的这个 AIPC 啊，这个嘲讽的是谁？应该不用我多说了吧？那还有一点啊，是发布会上没提的。M4 呢已经换上了更高频率的 LPDDR5 7500内存，那这个呢应该主要是为了 AI 应用所做的准备。
No,
内存带宽
why are people saying that? Bandwidth is good for everything. It's not even just good for the NPU and GPU. It's good for literally every component. And newer LPDDR is usually a little bit more efficient than older LPDDR. So I don't get it. Why are people so AI centric? It's
对 NPU 和 GPU 来说都非常重要。不过值得一提的是，它用的其实并不是我发布会后
It depends. The LPDDR5X spec has been a little weird, where technically everything above 6400 megatransfers is LPDDR5X. I don't know when we have started including 7500 or like 7700 in the LPDDR5, not 5X spec. But yeah, I guess when we say it's not LPDDR5X, it's not like the 8533 that is very common amongst like Android devices. But to me, if you had told me 1 year ago it would be using 7500 megatransfers per second memory, I would have said, oh, so it's using LPDDR5X, just not the fastest kind of how LPDDR5 wasn't just 6400 megatransfers as an option, but also like 5500 or something like that.
的 LPDDR5X 内存啊，而是一个更高频的 LPDDR5 内存。那这个呢，大概率是为了延迟考虑。
Yeah, this is my questions about like I've seen that consideration that the way that latency timings are adjusted, this might still be technically like LPDDR5 and not 5X. And Apple does have a tendency to only use like the highest end memory from each generation, so they might be waiting for LPDDR5T 9600 or even like the latest Samsung at like 10.7 what they are putting out, which would be 10,700. But yeah, to like the average user, whether it's LPDDR5X with latency timings more similar to LPDDR5, or it's LPDDR5 more with speeds like LPDDR5X, right, doesn't really matter.
我们也会实测一下它的内存延迟。
But yeah, this does come back to specific tests, like specifically stuff like the way memory latency is addressed. Maybe Apple is still using the same memory controller from older chips, and now they're just like, this is why they're still technically using LPDDR5, because that's what the latency is tuned for, and maybe they will have a much newer memory controller on the next one. YouTube colon cheesy, you see LP5X in general is 7467 or 8533 exactly. Most commonly the former in laptops, but they claim that they use higher clocked regular LP5 instead of lower clocked LP5X. It's interesting. Exactly, 7467, which is around 7500, is like a legitimate 5x like stock frequency. However, I have seen some disparity recently, even in how it's covered on like laptops that now adopt LPDDR RAM with like Meteor Lake and upcoming like Lunar Lake and stuff like that. And a lot of them are like calling some of those higher speeds legitimately LPDDR5, not 5X. So I'm actually not putting into question what he's saying. Maybe he like read like that little part that like is like the description, and maybe technically because of latency timings and whatever, it's labeled as LPDDR5. Don't forget that 5X is not actually known for that much better latency than 5. Even though the spec was supposed to improve it, I don't know. It just didn't pan out, I guess, fully. So let's see if this actually improves it. A lot of times, memory latency timings usually are more enhanced by just having a much better memory controller than even just memory. This is why sometimes you will be shocked just how much you can overclock certain memory if you just have the right motherboard, if you have the right memory controller and stuff like that.
这表现是不是也有所提升？那接下来呢，我们就来聊聊 CPU 的微架构啊。这次依然要非常感谢俊杰1475同学的帮助，这次的测试过程可以说是相当的曲折啊。那接下来我们就来对比一下 M2、M3、M4 三代的微架构，来看看这次到底改了什么吧。那之前我们聊过啊 ，A17 Pro 和 M3可以说是苹果在 A14 和 M1 之后变化最大的一代微架构，同样也是目前市面上最强力的。而这是 M4。
Which, by the way, like, I mean, I think it's good that they will say stuff like, "Oh, it's the best architecture basically on the market." I think that kind of matters. Acknowledging that stuff is exactly what certain assholes on the internet don't want to, because they don't want to give Apple any credit, basically.
的大核呢，则是在之前优秀的架构基础上再做了一次进化。那相比较于 M3 的大核呢 ，M4 的大核在解码单元上
we've talked about that. Supposedly a wider decode.
宽度从 M3 的9宽再次扩张到了10宽啊，也就是说每个时钟周期可以解码10条指令。要知道，苹果从 A14 到 A16三代的架构都保持了8宽的解码单元设计啊，结果 A17 Pro 到 M4短短半年多时间里面，直接连续2次加宽解码单元啊，架构进化的策略上，这次是真的挺激进的。更宽的前端解码单元一般对应着更强的后端处理性能啊。我们测下来啊，后端的执行单元从数量上来看，其实并没有增加，也许是上代的前端提升。
This is exactly why I said sometimes like, oh, but the backend has not improved. Okay, maybe that's Apple's decision. Maybe it means you are wrong on the front end. This is why this kind of stuff actually matters very little to me. I think as more of a like enthusiast, but like regular consumer, not like an engineer. I just care about like, is it the latest ARM-based architecture, right? Is the IPC itself interestingly enhanced? Is it mostly clock speed? How much is like contributed to the efficiency by the actual architecture? How much by the new node? How much of the speed increase maybe for the GPU or the NPU is like architecture derived? How much clock speed derived? How much node derived? And how much bandwidth derived? And I just think that when it comes to like hyper details, like how wide is the decode and does it measurably increase the backend of how many processes the chip can handle overall, it doesn't really matter that much.
并不足以喂饱大幅增加的后端规模。那这次 M4 的新架构啊，大幅增加了 dispatch buffer 和浮点单元的 scheduler 调度队列。那这样的改进呢，可以让内核的并行度进一步提高。调度队列增大呢，也意味着更多的指令可以并行执行。那这
Like, yeah, the floating point has improved. Maybe that relates somehow to the changes that have anything to do with scalable matrix extensions. I'm not an expert in that in any way, so I will basically hold back on making any kind of like definitive statements on this. Once again, I do want to point out the way they quickly get that stuff and the way they basically give credit to one guy from Twitter. This is where I would worry a little bit, but you can see like more entries on the scheduler, 87 versus 78, 72 versus 60, a 50% larger dispatch buffer here, 15 versus 10, here 15 versus 12. So if that is correct, that would be a very interesting improvement, obviously even over like the M3, which was new and improved on several of those things over M2. but take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
这也就意味着处理器后
What
端
should be noted is that the L1 cache buffer is the same at 192 kilobits.
利用效率就可以来得更高，再加上前面提到的前端解码部分上的改进，综合起来呢，就可以让整颗处理器的指令吞吐量进一步提升啊。那新架构的进一步变宽呢，也体现在 ROB、TRT 深度上。那苹果现在这颗超大核啊，可以说是目前所有处理器架构里规模最庞大的一颗，这也让我非常期待它的实际性能表现。那除了更宽的微架构以外呢，这次的 M4还引入了 SME 单元，你可以把它简单理解为 ARM 版的 AVX 512。那 M4的 P 核和 E 核数呢
I will say this is probably the most basic representation you can do of SME, but in my opinion, it's probably world class. Like, I love it. Like, SME, like, ARMS. What? Why can't I? Like, ARMS, AVX 512. I don't know how correct it is to say architecturally, but I really like it.
一个 SME
And yeah, both the P and the E core clusters have it, which, as I've said, Apple really takes care that their P cores and E cores have relatively similar capabilities. This way they can avoid like certain issues, like again, as I said, like not being able to hand off a task dynamically from one cluster to the other. So really, really appreciate that. Both P and E-core clusters have SME unit. So that's quite cool.
单元，那它和 CPU 内核共用 L2 缓存，在支持 SME 的程序里 ，M4 会有非常大的性能提升。那你们也看到了 ，Geekbench 6.3引入了对 SME 的支持之后 ，M4 的跑分有了大幅的上升啊。那我们也简单测试了一下 P 核和 E 核分别的指令吞吐量啊。那加入 SME 的支持呢，应该还是为了给未来的 AI 应用加速。年底的 ARM 公版内核也会像 M4 一样提供对 SME 2的支持。我们还测了一下分支预测失误率啊，从结果来看 ，M4 的分支预测能力应该没有什么改进。那总的来说呢 ，M4 更大的核心在 M3 的基础上，再次提升了前端的解码能力以及后端的并行度。你可以说它是进一步挖掘了 A17 Pro 和 M3 那代微架构设计的潜力。那它的设计目标呢，应该就是让 A17 Pro 和 M3 里面增加的后端执行单元尽可能去火力全开啊。那我们还测试了 M4 的内存与缓存性能，可以看到 M4 的内存延迟明显比 M3。
The memory delay of M4 is significantly lower than that of M3. So that's something I didn't know. M4, I guess that's memory latency, right? Memory latency lower than M3's, and that's going 96. That's nanoseconds versus 88.
3有所降低，延迟控制呢已经来到了88纳秒的水平，比起上代 M3 的96纳秒左右有所改善。那这个呢就应该是用 LPDDR5 7500而非 LPDDR5 X 的主要原因了。那至于小核心呢 ，M4 的小核心依然沿用了 A17 Pro 和 M3 小核的微架构，只是频率更高而已啊。那这个呢，就是 M4 大小核完整的架构图。感兴趣的同学也可以截图自己来研究研究。
I would be interested to maybe go through, because I assume even if their data is like not perfectly correct for everything, it might at least have like a certain pattern and like basically repeat the same mistakes, which might make their own data comparable to their own data. I probably would want to at some point look into their analysis of like the Dimensity 9300, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, then eventually the 8 Gen 4, and see like what their results are for stuff like memory latency and stuff like that.
那了解了架构之后呢，我们就该请出业界公认的跨平台测试标准 Spec。
Yeah, Spec 2017. Now, as the name suggests, it is actually I wanted to make a joke here. Spec 2017 is actually the latest version, and I believe the last time it has been updated is around 2022, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it definitely is at least in some need of an overhaul to add some newer instruction sets and whatever. So yeah, it's not like I want to criticize it because it does give great results to Apple, but to me, it just feels like we're overdue an upgrade at this point. This is, as far as I know, like a paid benchmark suite, so maybe they just don't have enough people like paying in order to justify making a new version. So this is the main test that also like Anantech uses for like their desktop chip tests, but yeah. Unlike Geekbench that gets like updated every couple of months in a way, and certainly whenever like there's a brand new chip, this doesn't.
17了，来直观的看看性能提升幅度啊。那这次的 Spec 2017当中呢，我们依旧测出了精确的内核功耗和实时。
4.71 watts, 3.83 watts, 6.48 watts. Oh, those numbers actually sound pretty good.
的核心频率，那 M4 呢放在 iPad 里啊，不可避免的要受到被动散热降频的影响。但 M4 本质上呢，却并不是一颗移动 SoC 啊，它的封装方式、内存结构、频率策略等等，都和手机处理器有比较大的差别。
Yeah, like obviously it has twice the memory, like not just twice the memory bandwidth, but it has over twice the memory bandwidth over the A17, which does use slower memory. But it has like twice the memory, the bus width for the memory. It has like more controllers for storage and whatever. Has support for features like Thunderbolt. So yeah, it's definitely not like a smartphone processor.
显然啊，4.5 GHz 的峰值频率根本就不是为了 iPad 准备的。所以，首先为了能够测出它的峰值表现，我们会通过液氮来制冷。
But this is not. This is where we get into real issue. Now, I know that they want to get like maximum results, but as I've said, just that 100 extra megahertz, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but the fact that the chip believes it can run that might actually mean, right, that it basically runs 100 megahertz higher without contributing any extra performance with a disproportionate power drain penalty. We have seen that time and time again on desktop chips. Now, usually it doesn't happen between 4.4 and 4.5 gigahertz. It happens once you go above 6 gigahertz on Intel chips. It happens once you go like above 5.8 gigahertz on AMD chips or whatever. And then in older architectures, I've pointed that out time and time again, that Zen 2 was kind of notorious that it had like a hard 4.4 gigahertz limit or something like that, from which on it actually gave you more clock speeds, but you gained absolutely nothing, and what you were sometimes seeing are performance regressions and always IPC regressions, right? Because technically, even if you kept the same performance, well, now you are running at the higher clock speed, so just mathematically your IPC is going down. But then what it also gave you was an absolutely infinitely disproportional, because your performance gains are zero, but now you're using like 50-80% more performance, and you're getting absolutely none of it. You're basically running every single component, like every bit of cache and whatever, at maximum frequency and even above that, and you're not utilizing that, even though the chips thinks that, oh my god, I'm so cool, I'm so happy, like literally I'm so cool, let me run even faster, but it literally gives you nothing. This is why I'm saying liquid nitrogen is great for overclocking tests, because overclocking does not test the actual peak power usage, it does not actually test the peak performance for regular usage. It tested specifically for overclocking. This is why overclocking is a very, very different thing. nobody points out that like the 4900K can technically run at 9 gigahertz under liquid nitrogen for like 1 millisecond or whatever before the stability catches up with it. But it can, because obviously if you keep it cool, you can make the quartz or whatever in the silicon basically run at any frequency you want. But the problem is it just doesn't give you anything back. You think the liquid nitrogen is just for lols? Yeah, exactly. It looks professional, right? The iPad Pro could probably easily sustain its highest frequency in a freezer or with a back of ice. It could probably get it with like I have like a fan at home that connects to like a water supply because I don't have like air conditioning at my apartment. And I put some ice in there or like a freeze bag and whatever, and it's really cool. The air coming out of it is really cool. You could have easily strapped the iPad in front of one of those fans, and it would have stayed cool for hours and hours under completely sustained speeds. Yeah, I absolutely believe liquid nitrogen here is just for the lols. Say hello to my little friend. Leave her a super chat. Leave her a super sticker. Or subscribe to her Patreon. We'll call it her Patreon for today. Yeah, you can sleep next to me, whatever.
把芯片表面的温
She
度
doesn't
降到
want
0度以下。
to. She doesn't like that I'm taking up her
主动散热
table.
的 Mac 平台会有什么样的表现？也能让
Yeah, this is also like weird when you are saying like, oh, like we're doing this so basically it can keep up with the actively cooled Mac. Now you're giving the iPad like 5 times whatever the cooling capacity of the actively cooled M3 Pro.
让我们前瞻到 M4 Pro 和 M4 Max。那显然啊，我们评
No, it does not give us really previews of M4 Max and M4 Pro because it's not an overclockable chip. In software, it might basically give you 100 megahertz more, but it will not give you like completely different like frequencies or whatever. It won't go up to 5 gigahertz or something.
频道相比较于 iPad 本身呢，更关心的是里面这颗 M4 芯片本身的技术水平。那为了看得更全面一点，极限峰值呢肯定是要测的。但是啊，我们
Yeah, and now we got it. This is extreme, like, and yeah, I'll do this. Extreme peak value must be measured. This is when you ever hear me criticize Geekerwan, it's for exactly this approach because we don't looking for like an extreme value which I think liquid nitrogen could give us. We're looking for like a simple mathematical like peak value. No, but we're looking at the extreme peak value, right? We are not interested if liquid nitrogen just gives us 100 megahertz, but those megahertz don't give us nothing, and then we stop using liquid nitrogen. We aren't seeing like what is the regular peak performance and peak power draw of the M4? No, we must know how much peak power will it draw under an extreme condition like liquid nitrogen. And this is exactly how we get to stuff like 11, 17 watts single core power consumption that we'll see later in the video because I've seen a lot of screenshots from people basically analyzing this video.
也会展现一下 M4 在 iPad 下的表现，以及和 M3 拉来对比一下能效。那包括这次呢，我们还引入了一个新的测试，我们可以利用 Xcode 模拟它的轻度发热降频时的频率表现。那这个时候频率会接近4吉赫。那这样一来
Where are the subtitles we can use?
和 M3 横向对比，
What?
同频性能和功耗了。那接下来我们
What happened?
直接公平的和 M3 横
No.
和原神是一样的。会有什么样的表现？频道相比频 M4， 包括这次呢，我们还引入了一个新的测试，我们可以利用 Xcode 模拟它的轻度发热降频时的频率表现。
This is where the subtitles are broken.
4吉赫啊，那这样一来呢，我们就可以非常公平的和 M3 横向对比同频性能和功耗了。那接下来我们来直接看性能。
Hello?
加上高
The high frequency performance is naturally
自然
indistinguishable
是差不了的。从绝对
in terms of absolute performance. M3 it goes to 9.8. Like yeah, those values make perfect sense to me. It's like liquid nitrogen peak, extreme peak power peak value, right? This is my issue here. uh, like especially like 18 watts, like 18 watts, that's probably most of the power it draws under multi-threaded tasks.
性能上来说 ，M4 这颗大核的峰值性能几乎比 M3 的大核高出了20%啊！半年时间提升20%的绝对性能啊！这颗 CPU 应该是 M1 推出之后到今天为止单核性能提升最大的一次，但超强的性能啊也带来了明显拔高。
And by the way, Spec 2017 does not have like SME results or whatever there, so. Take it as you will. It's less modern, but it's still valid. And yes, this is why I'm trying. Like, these results have nothing to do with real world. Like, this kind of increase in power consumption from the M3 to the M4, like that just doesn't line up with anything we see in terms of battery life. Like we have had people run like high intensive apps for longer on M4 iPad Pro than on M2. Now, the efficiency of the Tandem OLED screen, that will account for something, but not for this, not for doubling the power and peak performance. This is ridiculous. This is exactly what I kind of expect to see on the liquid nitrogen. Actually, maybe the improved cooling internally, maybe it actually like communicates better with the liquid nitrogen. It dissipates the heat like better directly over a larger area. So maybe the liquid nitrogen almost helps it more. But if you believe that the power draw of M4 versus M3 here like goes from 5.3 watts in whatever this means to 8.95 watts, which is over 3.5 watts more, which is basically 60% or more power increase. For this is ridiculous. This has nothing to do with it. Like, and for what? For this performance? No.
两者都
This is
跑峰值性能
bullshit.
的情况下 ，M4 的大核仅仅是内核功耗就已经比 M3 高出了60%啊！用60%的峰值功耗换20%的。
I should have been drinking
这个
something
操作好像有
stronger.
点英特尔啊，或者说它有点像 AMD PBO 的思路，那大幅拉高功耗预算，去拉高处理器的极限单核性能啊，这个呢就跟苹果 M1 和 M2 的逻辑完全不一样啊。那这种玩法呢，对于 PC 来说是合理的。但是它显然并不适合手机啊，那所以你要拿 M4 去和手机斗蛐蛐啊，去比这个单核。
I want for one again. This is not a 4.5 gigahertz chip. Everything says it's 4.4 except for those guys. But can you imagine what happens if like the next chip from Apple is a 4.2 gigahertz chip, right? So basically a 10% increase. Will it consume like how much more power do you think it will consume? Because also 60% more? Do you think that would actually be acceptable for Apple? Like this is again, they would have clocked this lower if it had actually if it actually had that kind of power consumption. It just doesn't line up with anything.
很难斗出个所以然来啊，因为这个东西的竞争对手呢其实是酷睿 Ultra 和 Ryzen 啊。那比起找一个这种非常甜点的单核频率 ，PC 呢其实更需要在功耗预算里面把极限单线程的性能拉高。那说实话
，he is transferring logic from like desktop chips to Apple's desktop chip, which like the M4 is not treated the same way architecturally as those, but yeah, this is a logical fallacy.
是有悖于这个苹果前2年的哲学的啊。
Yeah, which I mean, you have done stupid things when it comes to A17 analysis already, so. Apparently, it wasn't against Apple's philosophy 6 months ago with A17 and M3.
你还记不记得22年的时候，我们采访 Apple Silicon 的大佬，问他们为什么不超频？为什么不超频啊？当时他们可会说话了，言下之意就是我们跟英。
They still don't overclock. They don't have dynamic boost speeds. That's what overclock. Oh God. Oh. This chip is not overclocked. That's not what overclocking means. Overclocking is when you have different values for even like regular peak frequency versus like absolute peak frequency, which you can only run at specific like thermals and like power consumption metrics. Apple does not do that. The M3 MacBook Air, even like as a thermally constrained, passively cooled device, still reaches the same single core peak frequency. The only time Apple has ever come close to overclocking was like making the M3 Max, the M2 Max and M2 Ultra have a 3.7 gigahertz peak clock speeds versus 3.5 on the regular M2. But even that didn't suddenly allow the regular M2 to go to 3.7 once you connect it to liquid nitrogen. It only allowed that for devices where Apple knew that the voltage was there, the power supply was there, the thermals were always there. Oh God, this is exactly like the kind of like wishful like misinterpretation that I was afraid of. It's like, why not overclock? They're still not overclocking.
英特尔和 AMD 可不一样，反正我们不超频，能效第一位啊。
They do have the
真香了吧？考虑到 Mac 上的性能需求啊，能把极限性能拉上去，肯定是好的，只要不要影响中低频的能效就行了。
By the way, yeah, of course. By the way, M series chips are differently treated than A series ones. This is why they historically have a higher clock speed than the A series ones. But a higher clock speed is not like on a completely different chip designed for a completely different thermal envelope is not the same as overclocking. Clocking something up is not the same way as overclocking. Overclocking is generally considered to be like a more special use case for either limited time periods, very thermal dependent and whatever. This is, oh my god, this is wishful misconstruing of what Apple said.
那当然呢，这颗 M4现在是搭载在 iPad 上的。那这个极限性能呢，其实并不好测出来。那事实上啊，如果你使用常温来测试的话，它的频率
Oh, okay. More conservative frequency strategy, but at what frequency?
那我们实测 M4的锐频策略，各种意义上都很像英特尔和 AMD 的策略。
How
在
high
低
does
温
it go?
单线程下呢，最高频率可以狂飙
Wait, but that doesn't make what?
到4.5 G 赫，而常温下呢，或者是双线程的时候呢，则是跑在4.4 G。
What? Well, no, but now you're showing that the 4.5 gigahertz is basically an outlier. You cannot say that this is a legit. Like, you see how even like disingenuously like this ladder is drawn. Like 4.4 gigahertz is basically indistinguishable from 4.5, and now you're saying that 4.4 gigahertz is even supported for dual-threaded use cases, which means it has like a completely different like power ceiling. It means it's still very energy efficient at 4.4 if it can run on 2 threads. And one
三线程以上啊，则
yes, and 3.94 is a multi-threaded that has nothing to do with overclocking. YouTube colon cheesy. I agree that the results have nothing to do with the real world, but I think it's useful for eliminating the environmental variables, and it's not like the only cool DM4 in a crazy matter too. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying they're using metrics specifically to make Apple look bad. My problem with their methodology is generally with their methodology, especially for mobile devices. It's not an issue I have with them of like, you know, like the one Twitter guy that I analyzed that was like specifically attacking Apple. To me, the idea that 4.5 and 4.4 gigahertz are like treated as like two completely different clock speed targets internally is very silly, given that nobody in the real world will like even really experience 4.5 gigahertz. And now the question is, how much performance is gained between 4.4 and 4.5 gigahertz? How much is the power consumption increased? Does the IPC actually go down from 4.4 to 4.5 gigahertz? Right? The 3.94 gigahertz thing for being multi-threaded, that makes perfect sense. Every chip on the planet, unless you're like a downclocked server CPU that is specifically designed only for use in servers, and even then you will still have higher clock speeds for like fewer cores than you have for extremely multi-threaded parts. Otherwise, every single CPU, every single SoC on the planet will have different multi-threaded frequencies versus single core or even dual-threaded frequencies. That has to do with power consumption, yes. That has to do with thermals, yes. But even if you isolate those two, generally it has a lot to do with stability. And stability really can suffer if you want to run all those processors at maximum frequency. You start to get into maybe some cache issues. Maybe you need to make the core even bigger to actually even isolate the efficiency loss that you have between cores, just simply because of quantum mechanics and the fact that that you have a disproportionate power consumption with higher clock speeds, and it just isn't worth it. That stability reduction could result actually in a lower instructions per clock rate. You get into some crazy territory basically if you want to make the chip run at 4.4 gigahertz on all threads. But now we are looking at if this was 4.7 gigahertz, 4.8, I would fully agree. But this feels like over-analysis, right? It feels like you took one individual piece of data, which is that for you the chip ran occasionally on liquid nitrogen at 4.47 gigahertz or something like that, right? So you decided to analyze it as if this chip ever actually gives this clock speed to anybody else but you, and now you're analyzing it, and that to me is weird. And YouTube Kulanchizi, you have said that this is not designed to make M3 or M4 look bad. I agree. I just think it gives us weird results for every single thing we have. And it might disproportionately impact Apple because Apple's chips in the ARM world are relatively high clocked. They have extremely high IPC, so they are more impacted by having that much better cooling attached to them, right? Those much more extreme conditions.
全和3.94吉赫，也就是4吉赫附近的频率。那和其他 PC 处理器一样啊，每个大核都可以跑到最高的单核睿频，而并不是像
That, by the way, is not true. That it's not true that every single core on a desktop architecture can always target its highest frequency. It usually can, but often you will have two that if you have a 14900K, usually that 6 gigahertz peak speeds will be always one of two cores because those cores are have been tested to be the best ones, basically almost bin dead way, and the chip will just more naturally target those cores, knowing that they are the best at that task.
那样啊，只有一个核心去跑相对高。
Yes, but of course, MediaTek, for example, does use the X4 core, but it just clocks it differently because apparently a lower clocked. Is it X4 or is it X3 still? I think it's X4, right? It's one generation behind. It's one generation ahead in numbers from the Snapdragon chip. So, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 has an X4 core, and so does the MediaTek, but it clocks it very differently. And instead of using too many efficiency cores, because of apparently a lower clocked X core is so much better than the A715 or whatever, because you can by the way see that at that frequency, this is the frequency at which Apple now runs its efficiency cores. So and you will get a lot of instructions per clock because you have a generous amount of cache there. You have the latest instructions there, so you have fewer problems handing over tasks between the main core and those cores in comparison to giving a task from this core to the efficiency cores. So in that sense, they are correct.
而其他核心只能去跑相对低频的状态。那如果我们考虑常温状态下的性能和功耗 ，M4 的表现又如何呢？刚好我们可以通过 Xcode 给 iPad Pro 模拟一个轻度降频的工况。那在这种情况下，它的频率就会跑到和 M3近似的水平，基本就是跑在平均4吉赫附近的频点下。
Wait, but if you're doing that through Xclock, why not give us actual results?
那这个时候啊 ，M4 的
or are you doing this to like calculate IPC at basically 4 gigahertz or something like that?
性能
I'm sorry.
大致会比 M3 高8%。
Okay, clock for clock, it's 8.5%
8.5 左
higher.
右，功耗呢则高出 M3 5%左右啊。那么从这个成绩来看呢 ，M4 大核的能耗比啊只有非常小的进步，可能是架构带来的性能提升抵消了新工艺的能效优势，也可能是新工艺呢主要提升了跑高频能力。
That one Twitter guy will have like a field day with that one sentence. The new process mainly improves the ability to run high frequencies,
但并没有
but does not significantly improve energy efficiency because Apple's architecture is like not
这
that
个就
much
要等
better.
到我们待会儿测试 GPU 功耗的时候再去做验证了。那然后呢，我们就来。
I mean, can you do that exactly with the GPU, given that you now also have like different memory?
来对比一下新架构的同频性能 ，M4 的大核 IPC 算下来要比 M3 整数高出7.3%左右，浮点高出8.6%左右，平均下来呢，这次的 IPC 提升接近8%。虽然还是没有2位数的提升啊，但这已经是自 A14 推出以来苹果 IPC 提升幅度最大的一次了。它也再次巩固了苹果在处理器架构上的领先地位啊。然而在大核能效方面，用上 N3E 的 M4 却并没有给我们带来惊喜。这 N3E 的能效真的进步了吗？
Well, according to TSMC, it shouldn't have actually increased that much, right? N3B is a very, very dense process. Like, it probably depends if like the architecture was like built in mind for N3B. Otherwise, it really like if it was like only an architecture that was like basically thrown onto the node, then yeah, maybe it wasn't like taking that great advantage of, and now a fully optimized architecture for N3E is performing better. Otherwise, I don't think that there should be that huge of a difference between N3B and N3E simply as a node.
看来年底的 A18 Pro 啊，依然是悬念很大。那 M4 的新大核如果和目前 X86 阵营最强的14900K 去对比峰值单核性能，它的水平又如何呢？那 M4 在 4.5G 核下比6G 核的14900K Spec 2017里面。
Okay, I'll give them respect. This power consumption graph is hilarious.
成绩高出了大约18%，FP 成绩更是高出了26%啊。那综合来看 ，M4 的单核性能已经比14900K 高出了23%啊。那如果说 M3 的任务是单核性能和14900K 去打个平手，那这次 M4 的任务就是彻底干碎14900K。那我真的很好奇啊，英特尔今年到底要做什么才能原地提升23%的单核性能，来重新夺回这个最强单核性能的宝座啊？当年在测试 M1 的时候，我就说啊，苹果的架构是很强，可是跑不了高频，所以单核性能呢，其实依然会被当年的12900K 压着打。然而时过境迁啊 ，IPC 更高，还跑上了高频的 M4，面对的对手却是 IPC 原地踏步，只有不断超频维持颜面的14900K 啊，甚至英特尔最近还因为超频超过头，而在最新的固件里
Good, very fair criticism.
说真的
this is by the way, when I say that I criticize them for their methodology, I don't do that because they are against Apple. Can you hear those guys? They're like saying it demolishes the 4900K. They're laughing at Intel having to downclock essentially their chips and firmware because in certain motherboards it causes stability issues when you run it like 5.8 gigahertz or whatever because it consumes so much power. This idea that they're like inherently against Apple, no. It's the way their data gets specifically misconstrued against Apple and the way they themselves don't trust their own data enough, and they will like take great results for stuff like their gaming benchmarks, but then somehow ignore that and give their completely artificial like 3D mark results from like an ancient test, and then claim that a Qualcomm chip will be whatever 40% more energy efficient, but somehow in actual games it runs at 6 watts, while the A17 Pro delivers the same performance at 4.5 watts, or at worst it matches it. And then I'm like, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense unless that old test is not properly optimized for metal on iOS. but way better optimized for like Vulkan or OpenGL on Androids, and that easily explains the discrepancy because it's a very old test. It was probably built even at a point when like Apple back in the day supported OpenGL, and now we actually have a new 3D Mark test like Steel Nomad. I'd actually like to show it to you. Steel Nomad 3D Mark A17 Pro versus 8 Gen 3. That cannot be it. The new gold standard.
Hey yo, what's up, everybody? Hey yo, what's up? This is David. Integrated graphics.
We have like
a laptop.
Final
You need at
result
least
here.
run the same steel as I can get.
Thanks for the. This is like NVIDIA. Are they testing even like mobile chips here? The most powerful smartphone. It has to be like versus 31st of October. Nope. 3D Mark Steel Nomad. This is a German website. Steel Nomad, Vulkan, Android, iOS. That's the RTX 4090. Those are desktop chips. Oh, it does have results for like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 or whatever. Here's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. That's funny. At 100%. Where's the A17 Pro? Wait, the 7700 XT is... What? It's only that much faster? Oh god, this is such a... Command find A17. There it is. A17 Pro is slower, it appears, than the 8 Gen 3, at least in this. Wait, what? That's not what I had seen. Is any 3D Mark test more CPU intensive? The reason I'm asking is because many people ignore the fact that the CPU eats into the power budget of the whole SoC. Yes, I don't know if this applies here, but it definitely seems to be the case. Wait, are you telling me that it's like the M2? Wait, okay, so this benchmark's results are kind of meaningless. The M2 cannot be slower than the M1. Even going from iPad Pro to iPad Air, you have like faster memory on the M2, you have like a 20% faster GPU. These results are not what I would trust on the quick. Yeah, but it could be more CPU intensive. And I mean, it does make more sense because a lot of people want to even play like at like 120 FPS or whatever. So it definitely makes sense to include that. I think that's what got Apple ahead of others in actual games rather than the GPU benchmarks. Yes, but you have to like consider different stuff, right? Because we do have stuff like dynamic caching on like the latest architectures. We don't know how much that gets leveraged. I know it's supposed to be like completely like invisible to the actual like game and supposed to happen automatically. There is a question of like of how much the compute of like stuff like the A17 is leveraged, because we do see like results where it's like 80% faster in Geekbench 6 compute tests, and that definitely does not include the CPU. But then again, this is a test where I don't ever like downplay Android's performance, Android device performance, because I know that this test is probably just not very well optimized for like Vulkan compute or OpenGL compute So my question really has to come down: what is the result for actual games? And then that matters most to me, because that's real world. That's how it would happen with like a PlayStation or an Xbox. Basically, with every closed system, it doesn't really matter to me which individual part is better. I mean, of course, it's great if both CPU and GPU are fantastic, but if one really helps out the other, I cannot complain. Yeah, guys, I just cannot find the results that that I was talking about, I guess. That's 4 months ago. Test, still Nomad. Wait, that's the test I already opened? This has nothing to do with can anybody who's watching live tell me if they have like or is there like a database? 3D Mark Deal Nomad. Do they have like a database in the way that Geekbench has it? UL benchmarks. Oh, I think you might have to pay or whatever, right? It's free for all 3D Mark users, but I believe I cannot just simply like search all results, right? Compare smartphones. Android versus iOS. 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. PC Mark. No, they do not have that yet on their website. I think we might need just more data. Yeah, I think maybe we'll see it. But yeah, if somebody can find me, please just write the website that you think has that. Um, and like I believe you cannot share the full link inside the live chat. But if you just tell me which website you think does have it, I'll look it up. I'm sorry. The way my laptop stands, it constantly causes like the MagSafe to disconnect. 3D Mark, Steel Nomad, Snapdragon. I'll just probably look for maybe individual results. I looked at that. Because those results, like the only thing we saw were like the computer-based results, the German website, and it showed the A17 Pro to be slower, which is different than what I've seen briefly on Twitter and stuff like that. So forgive me if I don't intend to believe that right away, but obviously I will believe it if I see it more. It's just, you see, we don't have that much new stuff. Let's continue for now.
期待 AMD Zen 5了，那简直就是 X86 全村的希望啊！加油啊 AMD！ 那么聊完了性能超强的大核，我们也来看看小核的成绩。那由于小核架构并没有任何的变化，所以它的性能仅仅是来自于频率的提升。那这个频率的小核呢，也不大可能出现在手机端啊。那我大胆猜测，
what？
那这个频率的
Small cores and appear on mobile phones. Wait, but the architecture of the E-cores has changed. That's why they do have like the SME unit. Wait, that goes against, since the small core architecture has not
架构
changed.
并没有任何的
No, but the A17 Pro was not capable of SME compute as far as I know, neither on the P cores nor on the E cores.
变化，所以它的性能仅仅是来自于频率的提升。那这个频率的小核呢，也不大可能出现在手机
The
端
fact that its performance in Spec 2017 does not scale beyond the frequency increase does not mean it's not a new architecture. It's weird to me when like Apple comes out and says like, oh, our chip is a new architecture, and then like Geekerwan comes out and says like, no, bro.
我大胆猜测啊，这次 M4 用上6小核，可能是意味着苹果从 M3 Pro 开始引入的6小核为一组的核心簇，可能会成为未来苹果处理器设计的主流。
Yeah, I believe that the A18 Pro chip will be a 2+6 core design. Yeah, as they say right away.
意味着我们未来能够看到2+6核心设计的 A 系列处理器呢？我们拭目以待啊。那总结一下 Spec 2017的成绩 ，M4 这颗新架构高频率的大核跑出了非常离谱的性能，峰值性能比14900K 高出20%。
Okay, you know what? I'm writing this down for myself because I think it's fun. Peak perf is 23% higher than 4900K. You know what? That's a fun stat. They didn't say how much power it exactly draws. They just drew it completely out of the line.
23啊，让人非常好奇，如果 M4 摆脱了 iPad 的身躯，来到 Mac 平台上，又会爆发出什么样的情况
I mean, given that it will come to the MacBook Air, there it won't change at all. And then on the M4 Pro, MacBook Pro, that will have like a 70 watt hour battery and a fan. Maybe it will be like 3-4% faster. It won't be that much more. He is applying desktop chip logic to what is still fundamentally a mobile chip.
那么在 M3 推出仅仅半年之后，再次提升8.6%的 IPC， 也真的是挺出乎意料的。这也更让人期待未来的 M4 Pro、M4 Max， 甚至于 M4 Ultra 会有多强。显然 Mac 才是 M4。
I love the excitement. Could you hear that when he said Ultra?
甚至于 M4 Ultra
right? It's much more energetic. You can feel the desktop nerd. I love that. This is why I'm saying I don't hate these guys. Right? It's I actually don't know what they say M4 if they call it like something Chinese, like they say like M and then 4 is Chinese, or I just cannot hear it. But I was like just surprised on the Ultra.
显然 Mac 才是 M4 家族真正的舞台 ，iPad Pro 上的 M4 呢，也只能算得上开胃。
No, this is false. The M4 was designed for that kind of efficiency. Apple has improved thermals on the iPad to handle it. It will be even better. Maybe Apple will increase the frequency, especially on the GPU, I would say, on the M4 MacBook Pro. But again, he's applying desktop chip logic to a mobile chip. Apple will use that efficiency to have great battery life on MacBooks that have like larger battery capacities than the iPad. That's it.
我的这颗新核心在未来手机的 A 系列处理器上的表现呢，其实并没有什么信心啊，因为用上 N3E 的。
Again, and this is completely speculation. Like I want the A18 to come out and prove just how wrong he is in that regard. YouTube Code GZ, I think it's supposed to be like 65 watts for single core. Exactly. And I do believe that 65 watts for that chip is also like a little outrageous. I know it's around like 50 watts, definitely, but I believe it spikes to it like around 65 watts. But, right, I cannot criticize, I won't lower that number for the 4900K because they didn't give the same courtesy to the M4. I believe they're like 11, 17 watts numbers. Like there should be more like 7 or 9 watt numbers for the M4, and maybe there's 65 watt number for the 4900K. Well, granted, at 6 gigahertz, it probably should be like 65 watts, maybe 60. But then at 5.8 gigahertz, it legit could come down to as low as 50. Samhan saying, great stream. Good to see someone talk honestly about Geekerwan's task. Yeah, I do try to be honest here because it's not like I have any beef with them. I actually really appreciate like the enthusiasm there. You just saw me, guys, like pumping my chest, sharing my excitement for like an M4 Ultra chip. And I do like detailed breakdowns and everything. It's just that I do have, I believe, legitimate issues with the methodology. And I've talked to people that understand like chip testing and stuff like that. And they all basically agreed. None of them said it's completely invalid, and neither have I said that this is completely invalid testing. But yeah, basically everyone is like saying, I would like to see that power consumption graph, right? Because they give like this one number at 5.63 watts, 4.95 watts, right? But they never give us like a graph at how this looks. Is it actually like 4.2 watts and then with one spike to 5 watts? How long is that spike? How prolonged is that? Like, does it reappear during the testing and whatever? And those are numbers that I just would like to see from somebody who says they're dead focused on in-depth testing. I think they say the letter in English, but the number in Mandarin, we say it the same way in Turkish. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think that's how I would say it in German. I would also say M3, M4. Yeah, but the 4, I don't recognize it when he talks about it. So I was really surprised when he jumped to the Ultra with all the excitement.
它同频能耗比仅比 M3 的大。
By the way, guys, we've been streaming for quite a little bit at this point. Like, what was it? Like, has it been like almost 1.5 hours? Yeah, it's been like about an hour and 20 minutes. I do want to remind you, if you're watching this, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe. It helps out, obviously, the channel a lot. Please comment. It helps out me while reacting to the live chat. And, of course, it helps the engagement algorithm. Please share the video out with people who you think will enjoy this kind of content. Please hit the notification bell so you actually know when the next video comes on live. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can send a small super chat or a super sticker. Or if you want to support this channel financially in the long term, you can subscribe to my Patreon. And YouTube Kolanchizi and Sam Hein agree. That's great to hear, guys.
强了3%左右。那这个 N31的能耗比提升看起来也没有想象中那么大。
Yeah,
这个人类科技难道
the people who are acting like everything about N3E is some kind of a miraculous win over N3B, that is not the case. The reason why the M3 and the A17 Pro might be a little underwhelming for a 3nm design is because this 3nm design that we got late last year was supposed to come out late 2022, not late 2023. And those numbers would have been far, far more impressive in late 2022, especially when all the competition wouldn't have even been on N4P, but more on like N5P or something like that, right? But yeah, at last, this is not what we got. We got like the delay from TSMC. So people who are really trying to downplay Apple's efficiency gains with like their E-cores, more E-cores, the different balance, even like using smart memory, using a smart memory choice that allows them to bring down latency lower. Like people just underestimate Apple for some reason. I have no idea why. It's been like 3.5 years since they launched Apple Silicon. Across the board, they've kept out great battery life, great performance, great graphics performance. They've given us new features. I don't really know why people are suddenly like on the train that Apple will be completely overtaken by like. I honestly believe that this is marketing related, right? Because Apple gives us a new processor and a new device, but then they quickly talk beyond just the new processor. Well, they talk about the actual device, right? On the iPhone 15 Pro, they talk about the cameras, the USB-C port, the titanium design, and now people are suddenly like, well, maybe the chip is really underwhelming, right? Apple is not talking about it that much. While on the Android world, you do have like, oh, this is a new device with a new chip, but here also like its camera improvements, its display improvements, but you also have Qualcomm, right? It's like an individual player, and Qualcomm has been talking about like their Nuvia acquisition, the Orion core design, the Snapdragon X Elite, their eventual switch to N3E on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, right? And the media has all this fodder basically. Of course, their 40 tops neural engine and whatever, which is supposedly faster than the M4s, even though like TOPS is not an actual benchmark, it's just a theoretical numbers. I also doubt that you can compare it one-to-one between completely different architectures, the same way that teraflops are not really comparable between completely different architectures. But be it as it may, I believe the main reason why people have started to almost undervalue Apple's contribution to like chip designs and whatever is because Qualcomm has been so aggressively talking, and people usually mistake talking for like real confidence, real knowledge, right? I should know that I'm an always talking live streamers and you guys are watching me. Gotcha. But I believe that this is the problem. I believe people are listening to TSMC and believe that the more TSMC says, the more that says about like them being better. And I just don't think that's true.
真的是被
Or they will just blame every time Qualcomm loses to Apple, they will just always blame it on the Note. They will like say, oh, if they had the newer Note, they would have won. Even though the difference doesn't actually line up with the difference between the promises by TSMC, what the new Note actually delivers.
质子锁死了吗？更大的核心一定会带来更高的功耗，所以对手机来说，可能多加点小核去提升多核的能耗比，才是真正的出路啊。那么天玑9003和骁龙873呢，就已经证明了这一点。那么其实这个
By the way, no, they have not proven this because on the iPhone that does have 2 big cores, while like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 has only 1 truly huge core and then a lot of smaller cores. The Dimensity 9300 actually has a ton of big cores and it doesn't actually underperform the 8 Gen 3 in efficiency by that much. But on the iPhone, those big cores are still incredibly efficient in actual usage, and even with a tiny downclock, they go so far up the efficiency curve, right? It's insane, and that's how you tweak a core for either smartphone usage, tablet usage. That's not the same as overclocking it. It's just basically smartly adapting the clock speeds. And to me, I just don't see where his pessimism is coming from for the A18 Pro. Also, by the way, there is a chance that the A18 Pro basically completely flabbergasts. My bet on the A18 Pro is that it uses a new GPU architecture. And my guess for the A18 Pro CPU architecture is that it is the same as on the iPad, but that the difference balance between E-cores and P-cores, because obviously adding 2 efficiency cores to a 4+4 design is very different than adding 2 efficiency cores to a 2+4 design. I believe that people will be shocked how well the A18 performs, and once you account for the better cooling inside the upcoming iPhones, especially on the Pros that improve both like the CPU cooling with like graphene pads and then supposedly a metal chassis for like the battery, I believe people will be shocked by just how performant, how efficient, and just how real world the A18 will be.
一直很抗拒用 Geekbench 的，毕竟单核咱们都已经测了 Spec 了啊，多核我如果在 Mac 上直接跑个 Cinebench 不就可以轻松对比性能和功耗了吗？
But this is the issue, right? This is a very desktop-like approach. It's like, oh, we can very easily use Cinebench, even though Cinebench up until the 2024 version was in no way optimized for Mac. It got like one update to support Apple Silicon devices and like ARM architectures, and never had any specific stuff to actually leverage those chips. And Cinebench is basically a lazy benchmark in terms of the developers, because the reason why you as a Cinebench developer don't actually like really need to tune your benchmark is because you know that Intel and AMD will do your work for you because they want high Cinebench results. This is why they will analyze the latest Cinebench result and they will tune their latest CPUs for it. Apple does not do that for Cinebench on Mac because nobody freaking cares about Cinebench on Mac, and their Cinebench does not really exist as like a mobile thing. So this idea that Geekbench is worse because it's not desktop-y, that this is a very, very weird attitude. And I've seen it time and time again where people are saying, well, but Cinebench is a real world like app. No, Cinema 4D is 99% a GPU accelerated workflow. Nobody uses Cinema 4D anymore with like CPU acceleration, but somehow Cinebench still has maintained its status as like the premier CPU benchmark because simply people feel comfortable with it because there's like a lot of name recognition there. Guess what? Geekbench is the same but for mobile, and it actually works across mobile and desktop.
方面去对比英特尔和 AMD 的 CPU 啊，然而苹果这次居然先把 M4塞进了 iPad 里啊，好吧，刚好，那咱们也来跑个 Geekbench 来看看 M4如果加入移动处理器的赛博斗蛐蛐套餐，来看看 PC 处理器和手机处理器的性能和功耗到底相差有多大。那这次呢，我们不仅测试了满血 M4，也测试了低配版里面搭载的3+6核三缸青春版 M4。我一定要看看
The 3-cylinder Youth Edition? What?
苹果这一刀到底砍掉了多少性能，以及它们的能效差距到底大不大？那首先我们来看看强制冷却下。
By the way, every relevant test has shown that there's no big efficiency gap between the 9-core version and 10-core
功率
version.
性能啊，M4的单核跑出了接近4000分的离谱成绩啊，那这个成绩似乎比起 M3直接高出了26%啊，也比至今仍未上市的高通 X Elite 公布的官方成绩。
Some of those transliterations are hilarious, right? But those are manual ones, right? They're not included as like automated translations. This is what they put in. So they probably ran just like their entire speech through a translation layer and basically didn't fact check everything in there. So yeah, it's quite funny.
高出了1000分左右啊，但这么高的成绩其实也是因为 Geekbench 6.3加入了 SME 的支持。
Idiots will eat up that Geekbench 6.3 result is that much higher because of SME, but somehow like the Intel results that do include AVX 512.
所以 M4呢，在新版的 Geekbench 6里面会有明显的优势。我觉得 Geekbench 6这个成绩只能说仅供参考吧，可能还是前面咱们测的 Spec 2017的成绩更具有普遍性一点。那多核方面呢，满血的 M4跑到了接近15000分的成绩，那3+6核的残血版 M4呢则要低一些啊。
The residual blooded version of the M4 is a little slower.
3500出头，但即便是残血版 M4 也依然比 M3的成绩要高。满血版甚至可以直逼 M3 Pro。
Okay, he's saying basically like something probably like the full binned version, and it probably is getting like translated in a very weird way because it is for now, like until now, everything that included words like fully clocked or cores have always been translated well. So I assume he's using a different word, and this is how we get stuff like you've blooded and full blooded.
而在还没有针对 SME 优化的 Geekbench 5当中 ，M4 的表现依然很强。2750分左右的单核成绩，比起 M3大约提升了17%左右啊。那这个提升幅度呢，其实也很接近前面 Spec 2017的提升幅度。那多核方面呢，满血版 M4
Exactly, and this is why we need new modern tests to account for new architectures, for improvements to the instruction set, stuff like that. I was actually, when Geekbench 6.3 came out, I was fully convinced that ARM v9 had already seen certain instructions to like SME, VE, and whatever. And for some reason, it seems like it was missing. I don't know if it's in any way added to the X Elite, and if the X Elite will see like big changes on Geekbench 6.3. I'm inclined to believe that if the X Elite does not have it, that will mean that the A Gen 4 won't have it, and that to me means that I definitely would believe that the X Elite 2 will then have it, because I like, even though chip development takes about like 3 years time, I just don't see how they would let Apple have like a 2-year win based on like SME if they feel like it's unfair. I don't think it's unfair, but yeah, maybe some like a company just cannot afford that kind of gap.
凭借着更高的规格、更高的频率以及更高的 IPC， 轻松超过 M3 25%啊！即便是残血版。
Yeah. So by the way, you can see the efficiency core said work. I would love to see what is the power consumption here.
能够超过 M3 10%。那如果你要进一步对比上代 iPad Pro 的 M2 的话啊，那不管是单核还是多核的差距都已经拉大了。
Just as Apple promised, about 50% gap towards M2. This is why I also believe that Apple's claim about M4 using half the power of M2 to reach the same peak performance, I believe them because every other promise they have given was correct.
50%啊。
I was gonna say, why is the A17 Pro result so low? But it's actually really high because this is Geekbench 5. Which, by the way, like this is a third more performance versus the Dimensity 9300 in single core. So, and that multi-core score, you just know how much extra power this usage to achieve that gap.
这提升幅度确实有点大。那如果拿 Geekbench 5的成绩和 Windows 阵营的主流笔记本处理器对比的话呢 ，M4 的多核成绩比较接近功耗跑满的酷睿 Ultra 9 185H 和 i9 13900H， 那么比起 R9 8945HS 呢，则要强一点。那它的单核成绩就更不用说了，目前没有任何对手可以接近。那当然啊，用 Geekbench 去跑 PC 芯片的性能，它是有局限性的。那么等到 M4 真正上了 Mac 之后
What? You see, guys? He says sometimes stuff that feels right. It's very more like internet pundit than like actual like journalist. And I don't want to downplay, but when you used to read Anantech's reviews, they would tell you why they would sometimes not use a benchmark, or why they will use a specific benchmark, or why one specific result of a specific benchmark should be taken with a grain of salt. With everything else, he will just say there are limits to using Geekbench 6 for PC benchmarks, but somehow there are no limits to using Cinebench. There are no limits to using a completely outdated version of Spec. It happens to be the latest version, but it has not been updated in any way for newer workloads, newer architectures, right? Why is one so much worse than the other? And I know the answer. The answer is it's because it instinctively feels better, because one is more used on the desktop side, and that just naturally gives it like a little bit more believability, but that's not correct. That's completely taken out of the thin air. This is completely disregarding like what you like, how much mobile has evolved, how much Geekbench has tried to keep up with the improvements there, and because we now actually have a benchmark that tries to keep up with improvements, it gets downplayed as if it has some artificial advantage built in. But somehow tests that it had introduced like a year or two prior that leveraged AVX2, AVX512, stuff like that. None of this got nearly the same backlash or the same controversy. It is Apple specific. I'm not saying it's Geekerwan Apple specific. I'm not saying that they have a specific hatred towards Apple, but I am saying that it is a very common thing where people, like I saw that in the beginning when people were saying like, oh, but like ARM will never be as fast as x86, whatever that means, right? Oh, it's only because Apple has a node advantage. Oh, it's only because Apple gives their chips a lot of cache. And I'm like, wait, but that doesn't even come true, because the chips on the desktop, the cores on the desktop chips are huge. They're even bigger than Apple's M series cores. Where does this come from? If Apple is smartly using, like, and Apple's cache amount, yes, is bigger versus Qualcomm, but once we went to Apple Silicon, it was actually a pretty comparable amount to what AMD and Intel also have. It just so happens, though, that Apple is building an SoC and not a simple CPU. This is why beyond just L1 cache and whatever that is connected directly to the CPU, they also have system-wide cache that is pretty big, obviously, because that cache is also used by the GPU. But then again, nobody complained about AMD including Infinity Cache on their GPUs. So why Apple ever got that hate for using a lot of cache and spending more money on their chips? it never really like it never rang true to me. And even if you look at like Intel's latest like Meteor Lake parts, you will find that some of them cost like over $300, and that is in like mass orders. So if Apple were to use one of those things inside the iPad, that would probably make the iPad actually more expensive, and that would probably mean the iPad would have to be thicker with a bigger battery, more cooling inside if it wanted to replicate the same experience that you have on the M4. So in what way is Apple cheating by spending more money up front instead of having to pay Intel more money in the end? Jan Hendrik, welcome, my German viewer. Moin moin, it's 7 p.m., dude. But hi.
我们也会再来跑一个 Cinebench 2024，来看看它更加接近哪一款 Windows 的笔记本处理器。这 M4 的复合性能看
Again, why do you need Cinebench to understand how it's close to other Windows devices? There are other cross-platform benchmarks.
下来真的是非常强啊！那它的功耗呢？嘿嘿，在峰值状态下 ，M4 满血版在 Geekbench 5里跑到了30瓦的功耗啊，这个功耗比起 M3 和 M2来的要更高一点。残血版呢，则是跑出了25瓦的功耗，那这个功耗就比较接近 M3 和 M2的水平了。那这个功耗虽然高啊，但是我们早就说过，我们不光要看极限，也要再跑一下省电模式，才能判断出大概的能效表现。在省电模式下，满血版 M4 的成绩和功耗都比 M3 高一些，但是残血版 M4 的成绩就要比 M3 低一点了，但是功耗呢又要高一点。那 M2 的省电模式的平填反而还比较激进啊，总体能效大概是这样的。M4 的能效进步是有的。
By the way, I still have no idea. I've seen that in their other benchmarks. I still have no idea what they mean. Like, it's the explicit like energy save mode. Wait, what does that matter? Like, energy save mode on iOS is okay. I thought it was like a manual mode or whatever. No, that's probably just like the default mode in the operating system. Yeah, again, I always say I would really doubt over 30 watts power consumption. Now, if you ask me, is it capable of drawing over 30 watts? Like at peak multi-threaded performance, I would say yeah, probably at like a simple spike. Is it always probably using 30 watts in multi-threaded tasks at peak power? I would doubt it. Like it's weird that we don't have M1 result. Like this, by the way, this would only be CPU peak power multi-threaded. That would mean that on the 11-inch version, you could only sustain that for literally just 1 hour. And I'm not sure that that's true. But again, I'm pretty sure that you can reach 30 watt power consumption on the M4. For how long and whatever, that's unfortunately for somebody else to test, who unfortunately refuses to do it. Like, please, Anantak, please do it. Jan, you're saying you always say moin moin in Hamburg. Yeah, I know. Just kidding. Yeah, I think their biggest mistake is measuring the absolute 0.1 max power draw. Again, and I'm tired of saying the same thing, right? But they're insisting on using those kinds of numbers. In the graph, as this processor uses this exact YouTube Kulanchizi, you said it perfectly. I've said it perfectly too a couple of times, but the more I repeat myself, because obviously this is a live stream, that's kind of how it works, the more it becomes an issue, right? Because I try to add like new wrinkles to how I describe it, but yeah, you're saying it perfectly. They're using like 0.1, maybe 0.01, maybe it's more, maybe it's 0.2 or whatever. Spikes, what I call them spikes, maybe it's just like almost anomalies during power consumption, and they're using them as like a representation of the actual power consumption for a specific task. at a specific performance, and I just don't agree with that. I think I've run my iPads at like in very demanding workflows. I've even run like benchmarks back to back to back, and I never reached that kind of like, which would essentially result in like 1 hour of usage on the on the 11-inch version, or like 1.4 hours on the
还是得感谢加了这两个小
on the
核。
13-inch
如果不是
model.
因为这堆规模的
By the
话
way,
呢，
guys, we have passed a certain time milestone again, so I do want to remind you, if you're watching and enjoying this, please subscribe, please share this video with somebody who you think might enjoy this. Please comment both in the live chat to let me know what you think, but also afterwards, because it helps out the algorithm tremendously. Hit the notification bell so you know when the next video goes live. And if you want to say a small thanks for a lot of content that I'm putting out, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker, or if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which also now has a free tier if you just want to use it as a way to communicate with me. Obviously, I do prefer doing that over Twitter, but maybe you don't have Twitter, you don't want to use Twitter. Fully understand it. I've tried quitting many times myself. You can do so via Patreon.
多核能效可能也真的并不会有什么进步啊。
Again, there might not really be, like, this is where it gets ridiculous, because no battery life result, there might not really be any improvement in multi-core energy efficiency. That is just so ridiculous. And look, I know that the M2 technically will have like lower efficiency here, but like this just not jive with everything else that we have seen from this iPad.
三缸版的 M4 就已经能够说
The
明这个问题。
3-cylinder
当
version.
然，我们也可以加入目前的旗舰手机能效来对比看看啊。这个曲线的走向真是跟手机完全不一样啊。M4 这个能效和手机的表现差别确实很大。
Does this show the A17 Pro using less wattage than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 and the Dimensity 9300? But what is this then? What is this A17 Pro? What? I hate how large the subtitles get. I'll just briefly switch. Wait, that's a power curve for the 8 Gen 3? But if you draw the line for the A7, wait, that does not line up with their previous results, does it? Guys, am I wrong? Does this show the A17 Pro? Also, why is this Geekbench 5? Like, oh my god, how old can we get? Somehow Geekbench 6.3 is way too new, right? It cheats by using SME. But somehow we cannot be even using like Geekbench 6.2? But guys, anybody who's watching, my brain is getting slowly fried. Is this showing what I think it's showing? Where, like, this does not line up with what they have previously said, right? Like, even if this is like, even if this shows the 8 Gen 3 technically consuming less power, which, like, the lower one is power consumption, right? I hate how large the subtitles are. Yeah, this is wattage. The energy efficiency of M4 is really different from the performance of mobile phones. The high-performance M series will undoubtedly beat mobile phones, but in the power-saving mode, the energy efficiency is what? The energy efficiency will be close to that of mobile phones. You can see 3 plus 6, the M4 has almost reached the 8 Gen 3 curve in the power-saving mode.
那如果再往低频走，能效可能就会被手机芯片反超啊！毕竟 M 系的基础功耗是高于手机的。但有一说一啊，更多的跑在低频下且高 IPC 的核心，确实是目前提升多核能效的不二法门。那么总结一下 M4 CPU 部分的表现啊，30瓦的峰值主板功耗啊，换来了
okay. So this is, by the way, interesting. So they do say they're testing motherboard power consumption, which on a mobile chip is actually quite interesting because on like obviously the motherboard handles a lot of stuff, and yes, so it does on a desktop. But there is a disproportionate nature to what the motherboard consumes for a mobile chip because it still has to do all the motherboard stuff versus a desktop class motherboard because the chip itself, once it consumes like 200-300 watts, the motherboard starts to matter less. It's actually interesting. So I will return it. So this is basically a confirmation. Geekerwan results include motherboard power consumption, at least for what they say about the M series. I don't know if they have found any way to isolate it on the Snapdragon chips, on the A series chips. I doubt it. But this alone leaves actually a lot of room for mistakes because it does not fully isolate the processor. And it actually leaves you way more vulnerable, as far as I know, to those occasional spikes because the motherboard does not have to be as hyper efficient as the chip because it's relatively large. It can spread itself pretty well. It also is like built on completely different nodes and stuff like that. So that it could explain actually quite a lot.
英特尔 Ultra 9、AMD Ryzen 9笔记本同级的多核性能。那换句话说，就是目前 iPad Pro 的 CPU 峰值性能，甚至是和 ROG 换差接近的。虽然我并不知道 iPad Pro 拥有这样的性能可以用来做什么，但我非常好奇，在 MacBook Pro 上 M4 这套新架构如果对足够高的规模，比如 M4 Max 去做一个12大核6小核的规格，那它的性能得有多强啊？那这个时候 X86 阵营是不是还真的能够拿出足以应付它的笔记本处理器？但另一方面，能效呢才是移动处理器最应该在乎的部分。就目前的测试来看呢 ，M4 的能效基本上就来自于那两个新加的小核。那架构也好，工艺也好，似乎
Wait, but that's a lot. Like, and 2 new efficiency cores and new core architectures, that's a lot already.
都并没有带来更好的能效。
It
那
seems,
再来聊聊
okay, I got it. Like his sentence was like split up.
GPU 吧。前面我也说了 ，M4 的 GPU 并没有带来什么。
That's 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. Again, still Nomad seems to behave in that test a little differently. It also seems to be a test that just loves raw bandwidth. It does not seem to care as much about a chip having a lot of cache and stuff like that. So you can see basically how M2, M3, which do have like a lot higher bus widths than the HM3, but then a little slower memory. You see how that behaves, and now you see how the M4 scales on top of that. Neighbor stocks, wouldn't the voltage on the mobile M4 version also not be different compared to the desktop? You are correct. Yes, this is why I don't understand why this guy is saying 20 times, I cannot wait to see it in the desktop, because they definitely will not change it for the MacBook Air. They might ever so slightly change it for the MacBook Pro, maybe only with like the efficiency core stuff, but they usually don't either. At least we haven't seen that on the M3 generation. And when it comes to the Pro and Max chips, well, those are different chips. They also do have different considerations in the way they are built. They have more bandwidth that they can leverage. So sometimes Apple will give them higher clock speeds, which they have done on like the M2 Max and the M2 Ultra. But for now, they haven't actually done that on the M3 Max versus the M3. So I would be inclined to believe that single core results probably will stay absolutely the same across the entire M4 family. Neighbor stocks, I figure there are some conversions done on the motherboard, but the board voltage and tuning for the processor might differ too. Yes, obviously the Macs have also like up to PCI 4.0 storage, so that is different. There also stuff on like the MacBook motherboard is just placed further apart, right? While spacing, especially on the iPhones, but also partially on the iPads, is really optimized for like space efficiency. So that can eat a little bit into like power efficiency. And of course, the Macs have also like different considerations, like they have more Thunderbolt Thunderbolt ports and stuff like that. So yeah, I would assume that just by default, just from being larger, a Max motherboard will have a higher power consumption, stuff like that. But the fact that they include motherboard already makes me understand why some of their results are what they are. There's a lot of room here where like spikes will be higher, especially some of the stability in testing might not be the same. So while I don't want to shit on their methodology too much, the fact that they've like legit come out with that is like basically a spec of their testing proves a lot to me. And also for like GPU tests, I cannot blame them. Their test came out a day ago, but this is an outdated test by every metric. It already wasn't a very new test a day ago, but now there's like an objectively much better test. And it doesn't matter to me, by the way, if A17 actually loses to the A Gen 3 in Steel Nomad. I would prefer for it to be about even, because that's about the result we see in actual games. But if it still loses, I have no problem with that. The only problem I have with stuff like 3D Mark Wildlife and especially GFX Bench is that those are older tests. They've been like tuned a little bit over time, slightly optimized more for metal, but we have never seen them being reworked from the ground up. So yeah, those are some of my complaints. Sam Hein, going back to power for a moment, there are inherent problems with measuring power which are made even more difficult by iPad OS limitations. Yeah, I don't know. They say they, like I saw that in like one of their videos, that they have like some specific tool, and maybe they're like comparing power from the wall, which power draw from the wall is such a bad metric. I don't even want to start with that, but maybe I have no idea. It's not. I don't think they have like a full-on explainer about their methodology the way that like Gamers Nexus have. Do they? We don't have a known power level to compare methods. Yes, this is also like when you actually look at benchmarks, right? Those numbers are not completely like out of nothing, right? I believe that Geekbench, for example, says that like what 2500 is like the result of the 12700 or whatever, right? And then everything else scales accordingly. And I almost believe that we need that a little bit for their testing methodology, right? Because once you start including all the different stuff with motherboards and then using cooling, which we don't like super aggressive cooling, which we don't know how that disproportionately affects like maybe Apple or other stuff, that to me just becomes like, ooh, dude, I appreciate the detail testing, but maybe some of the details you should have like rethought a little.
什么新鲜的东西，10%的频率也带来了10%的性能，并没有什么值得聊的地方啊。那如果你想更多了解这颗 GPU 的细节和性能，可以去看一下我们对 M3的。
By the way, this is one thing that I just wanted to point out. This 3D Mark Solar Bay test. This is a test where Apple's A17 Pro somehow loses out more to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 than it does in like regular rasterization tests. Now, I'm not saying that Apple does not suck at ray tracing, because maybe they do suck. Though some of their other results suggest something different to me. But to me, when I look at how it scales from M2 to M3, where you get like around like 45% more power or something like that, and ray tracing itself is like 4 times more powerful according to Apple, which is, by the way, not uncommon. The RTX 20 series versus the RTX 10 series was like 10 times faster in GPU, because that was like their first ray tracing optimized architecture. I'm not saying this result has to be 4 times faster, right? Because that would mean that there's zero rasterization happening and only ray tracing. But I do wonder how much ray tracing actually is in there, right? I wonder if the ray tracing is like really leveraging the M3. Like I would have expected at least a 2x increase. Like I don't want to be an asshole here. I cannot be sure because it's not like I'm an expert on the exact architecture, but it just feels a little weird. Semheim, by their own admission, Solar Bay is a very light RT benchmark. It is basically just reflections. I wonder if they're like 1/4 resolution or something like that. If we look at Blender, we can see their RT scores are very good. Exactly. But then again, Blender is also a little bit more compute-y than graphic-y, which is like I'm being stupid on purpose here. So I could still believe, right? The reason what people don't understand when people tell me, oh, you just cannot accept it because Apple is losing, right? And no, that's not the case. I have no problem believing that, for example, like what is it called? Like Warships, right? Has like ray tracing, and I believe it runs faster on a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 than it does on an A17 Pro. And I have no problem with that. It's an actual game. Maybe it's not fully optimized. What do I care, right? That's the real world result. But when like Solar Bay on like the A17 Pro gets you like what 5,000, 6,000, and then like the which doesn't even make sense with like what the M series chips deliver, because their raster gap is not large enough to make up for such a huge ray tracing gap. But then the Snapdragon chip has like 9,000, so it's like 60-70% faster than an iPhone, which doesn't line up with its raster, doesn't line up with real world game results. Then I'm really like asking, like, dude, this has nothing to do with Apple. I would be saying the same thing about like when there are tests where like Nvidia outperforms AMD by like 4x in ray tracing. I'm like, yeah, that would have made sense with like the last AMD architecture or anything, but it does not make sense with like the 6 or 7,000 AMD chips. And in fact, every time any of those apps get like properly optimized, you see a somewhat huge, like 30, maybe even 40% gap between like the RTX 4090 and the AMD 7900 XTX. But you don't see suddenly a 3 to 4 times gap, right? And this is the same thing I want to say here. I would be fine seeing a continuous like 10-15% gap between the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 and the A17 Pro that would line up with like the higher bandwidth it has. It would also line up with the higher power consumption, at least according to everyone but Geekerwan, right? But then we have like results that are like 60% faster, and I'm like, what? Where do I see that? Like the only time I see that kind of disparity in anything else is the 80% difference that the A17 Pro holds over the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in Geekbench compute. And yet I have the intellectual honesty to never use Geekbench compute for cross-platform comparisons, because I can see that it's really, really bad at it. Right, but others who are very much anti-Apple, not in the way that I am ever anti-Snapdragon or anti-Android, but really hatred, they will use any of those results to say, you see how much Apple has fallen behind. I'm like, no, not really.
详细评测，当时我已经对这颗 GPU 呢做了足够多的测试啊。那比起性能啊 ，GPU 维持相同的架构，可以让我们更直观的看到 N3E 工艺能耗比是不是会比上代进步一点。那事实上呢 ，M4 GPU 的峰值功耗比起 M3 的确有了显著的拉高啊。
Significantly, wait, how much?
和 CPU 类似。
Similar to the CPU, it has also increased from about 25 to 30 watts. Yeah, they're measuring spikes. I'm more convinced of that than ever.
30瓦左右。那如果我们把 M4 控制在和 M3 接近的8300分左右时呢，它们的功耗也就基本维持了同一个。
Yeah, that just doesn't make sense. Not with any of the tests that I've seen. Just in terms of thermals, it wouldn't make sense, because we have seen tests where M4 iPad Pro runs a game where the Tandem OLED screen is at full brightness, so it consumes about the same energy as the mini LED screen, right? But it runs at like 60% higher brightness. and then it still outperformed it in battery life. And it never overheated or something like that. This wouldn't be the case if it actually went from like 25 to 30 watts. Those results meaningless. This is why I'm not taking any notes. And now I really see that this does not make sense.
看来 N3
I think they have a better way to test the A Gen 3. Maybe because of the openness of Android, maybe they better isolate for like the power consumption of the motherboard. Maybe they just are that much closer to the power consumption of the actual SoC. I don't know. Maybe they're way better at isolating for like spikes. But yeah, those results are just
3亿
ridiculous.
的高频能效并没有任何惊喜啊。那低频能效呢？哎，两颗 GPU 我们都跑在省电模式 ，M4 的 GPU 在成绩稍高于 M3 的同时，功耗也要稍低一点。但这两个点呢，其实也很接近，可以说低频下的确有一点点能效提升，但真的也就只有一点点而已。所以测到现在，答案就很明确了。N3E 相比较于 N3B 工艺，并没有带来什么能耗比上的显著进步。那抽象的是，上一代的 N3B 其实也并没有比上代的 N4P 能耗比进步多少啊。那其实这种现状对苹果来说还真是蛮亏的，花大价钱用最先进的制程，却并不能够像以前那样。
No, the N3E is cheaper than N3B. What are you talking about? Oh my god, this is not a loss for Apple. Switching to N3E is cheaper for Apple. Bro, is this okay? Now I'm getting a little angry. Guys, please tell me if I'm completely misreading this. He's basically like saying, oh, Apple is overspending on a new Note, but he does not know that N3E has like higher yields, which is very important for a mass market company like Apple. It's either the same cost or cheaper, probably depends on like just how much you order. Like, no.
获得能效的 buff 啊。那如果你期待 N3
I mean, N3 by itself is more expensive than N4 and N5, but then again, people don't quite know how much exactly Apple pays because Apple does have the advantage of being first customer, of being largest customer, so I don't know. Why would they expect N3 to improve in any meaningful way to N3B in terms of efficiency? I don't know, bro. I don't know. Like, let me be a stickler for detail again, right? N3E versus N3B TSMC. Hopefully we get like the exact it's from 15th of May, so it's relatively recent, right? So this is N3 versus N5. So that's not even N5P, which, by the way, that power draw, if Apple is actually correct, which I believe they are, and yes, it has to do with architecture, and yes, it has to do with them having more efficiency cores, but the fact that they are bringing power down by 50% versus versus the N5P based actually M2, that obviously goes beyond this already. But let's just see the numbers here, right? Because we cannot compare those numbers, right? We have to compare this versus this. So 25 to 30%, it's not actually 7% because it's 1.25 to 1.32. It's more like 4-ish% or whatever. And then from 30% to 32% savings, those numbers would be basically identical. So we take like the difference from minus 27.5% to minus 32%. We're basically at like a 3.5% efficiency gain. I have no, and this would actually line up with what he has said in how it performs in the efficiency mode, right, in the power savings mode. So I have no idea. And the problem, Samhain, that I have with that testing is not actually the efficiency claim versus the M3. I should be quite clear about it. My problem is with his efficiency claim over the M2, right? Because even if you look at this, like, I mean, the M2 would be less powerful, but it also seems like... Okay, so the M3 is more efficient than the M2, at least in their rating here. But now the M4 would see basically no efficiency gain further than that. So I would be really, like, if But wait, but that doesn't make sense either, because if we draw the curve as he does, well, suddenly the gap shrinks. And that is definitely not the experience most people are having with the device. This is weird. I don't know. Like, I think that the way their testing has like those spiky numbers, it just it just completely kills proper analysis, right? Because those numbers are basically anomalies in the actual test. And because we don't get that typical number that we would usually get, like the 1490, for example, it can spike, as I said, and it can actually spike in some ways higher than the 3090. But in most tasks, it will actually consume less power than the 3090. But if we actually were to work with those spiky numbers, well, now we would think that TSMC 4 nanometer is barely any better than Samsung 8 nanometer. And that obviously makes no sense, because that is basically the equivalent of 2.5 full node jumps, maybe close to 3 even. So I don't get it. I really don't get their numbers.
真的也工艺并没有还真是蛮亏的。
Yeah, so basically it's like they're saying has not actually improved the energy consumption of the previous generation of N4P, which is funny. There is no N4P chip by Apple. The M2 is N5P. The A16 is N4. Maybe it's N4P, but it's more likely N4. So he's basically saying Apple could be like Qualcomm, use N4P and basically like save themselves some money. Even though, by the way, Qualcomm's chips are like 40% larger than Apple's. Like Apple's A17 Pro is like 100 square millimeters. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is like 134, something like that. Yeah, this feels very against Apple almost. Like, oh, you see, Apple is overspending. I'm so smart. I wouldn't be doing what Apple is doing.
进步多少啊？那其实这种现状对苹果来说还获得能新气象的话，那你可能要失望了。还是期待一下各家在架构上的改进更现实一点。
Yeah, you see. By the way, we were just talking about GPU, but now suddenly we have to talk about what ARM and Orion are. And by the way, like not saying there's too much of a bias here, but where was it? Where did he show like the active cooling? Where is it? You did see the liquid nitrogen bottle that had the yeah, there it is.
把芯片表面的温度
Guys, if you ever wonder which company reaches out more to influencers, if it's Apple or Qualcomm, you now have the answer. Again, I'm not saying they have a pro-Qualcomm bias, but there are some things here that do make me wonder. Where were we? Here.
当然，这次我也测试了一个很有趣的东西。那如果把 M4 这颗 GPU 降频到
Semheim, you're saying it looks like they're measuring the M4, the highest, less efficient frequency, versus M2 and M3. It's more, yeah. To be honest, I have no idea anymore. Like they don't draw like full efficiency curves for any of the other processors, so that really messes with me. I don't know, like, if they're using, like, liquid nitrogen to test those other chips. I don't know if they're rerunning all those chips on tests on those older chips. They do not have the same, like, clear-cut methodology, the same that a Gamer's Nexus has. So.
手机的性能级别，它的功耗会怎么样呢？那么在和 iPhone 接近的4400分附近 ，M4 这颗 GPU 跑 WLE 的功耗只有6瓦出头，显然这功耗可比 A17 Pro 低太多了。那这种状态下的能效干翻所有手机芯片是非常轻松的。看来 A17 Pro 的 GPU 规模明显太小了，那能耗表现怎么能干得过人家高通和发哥呢？人家可是实打实的在堆规格啊！所以苹果能不能给 A1 系列处理器搞一个规模狠一点的 GPU 呢？在移动端，一颗跑低频的大规模 GPU 才是好文明啊！
He's right. It's a good civilization, but I agree that Apple has already added 2 cores on the A17 Pro for the GPU, but it does come down to the benchmarks itself here. I believe more so to the specific decisions, and we will see that once we actually get to games.
测到现在啊，你应该已经基本了解了 M4的性能表现，但是到目前为止，我们都还没有开始聊 iPad 呢，所以接下来我们测试的焦点要放回到 iPad Pro 了。那么首先从游戏开始啊，咱们首先来看看《原神》。《原神》这次非常少见的在新 iPad 发售当天就进行了适配。那我们实际数了分辨率，13寸的分辨率高达2292乘1718啊，11寸的则是在2292乘1600左右。那这个渲染压力和2560乘1440基本一致。那么13寸版本呢，则会稍高一点。那么在这么高的分辨率下，在须弥城跑图 ，M4 的 iPad Pro 它能撑得住吗？事实证明啊，这点压力对于 M4 iPad Pro 来说实在是过于轻松了。不管
Do we have an average? Because this already to me proves that their other tests are pretty worthless. Like, look at just how consistent this is.
不管是3台新 iPad Pro 当中的哪一台，都跑出了60帧一根直线的平均帧。结合功耗来看，这个游戏
Okay. Bro, you cannot do that to me. You cannot tell me you cannot tell me that there are no efficiency. Like, look, I know their comparison was like versus the M3, but like this does not line up. We have like a what is it, like a 25% reduction in power consumption, actually a little more, and an increase of like 15% in performance. So that's like a 40% performance to power consumption increase, more than that. And somehow he's like downplaying this. You gotta be shitting me. Like, that efficiency has to come somewhere, because it's like we've had like the discussion in the live chat where we said like, oh, maybe games are disproportionately benefiting from the better CPU. Well, that's all fine and good then, but we said that the CPU is barely more efficient and the GPU is barely more efficient. So where does this huge efficiency gain comes from?
能效表现明显比起
Also, by the way, like, what is this test? Like, how, like, by the way, yep, oh, okay, yep, I know it now. Guys, I have solved it. Oh, I will have to remember, this is how long in the video? This is 2 hours and 17 minutes or something like that. Maybe I should leave that as like, look at this. Oh my god, this solves everything. Here, I do have a mouse cursor. Here, look, the M2 iPad Pro underperforms the M2 iPad Air, but it consumes 40% more power. Guys, do you think if you isolate for just the SoC, and maybe the motherboard or whatever here, do you think this makes any sense on the chip that has the exact same like die, on the chip that has the exact same like capabilities? Like, those devices even have like the same Wi-Fi modules. Like, no. Sam Hine, they're trying to say the efficiency gains are due to Tandem OLED versus mini. Wait, but that doesn't make sense. This is a chip benchmark. Wait, this is an overall benchmark for the iPad? Wait, this is a benchmark for the iPad now. And not the chip? Why are we doing this now? Why are we forgetting that this is a chip benchmark? This is way more interesting if this is only for the chip. Or does that say like this is for the device and this is for like the chip itself? Does anybody know Chinese in my live chat?
M2 iPad 强了很多，并且最关键的是，这个低配版3缸 M4和4缸 M4，其实在
oh my god, like, here, I'll briefly turn off the subtitles. 59, M4, M4, here's M2, performing lower. Yeah, what is this? Which one is that? Because now, like, none of this isolates for the chip?
在实际游戏
I have to have subtitles. There's no difference in the frame rate and power consumption between the 3-chip M4 and the 4-chip.
的帧数和功耗上面都没有任何
Nor
区
should
别
there
啊。
be.
相比之下 ，M2 在测试的后半程则基本只能跑在50帧左右。难道这个米哈游说原神5.0要提升性能压力，是因为他们已经提前玩到 M4 了吗？另外啊 ，M2 的13寸 Air 比起上代使用 Mini LED 屏幕的12
Wait, what? 13-inch Air? Oh, that's the new, yeah.
9寸 iPad Pro 也要好不少，帧数更高的同时，平均功耗更低不少。那看
Wait, why are you accounting for Mini LED somehow? I want chip results.
看起来应该是上代的这个 Mini
Consumes too much power. Good for you to know how much power it should be using. Which, by the way, this is not the case. If Mini LED is tuned towards the same brightness as this, then you shouldn't be getting those kinds of fluctuations where it uses 40% more power.
LED 实在是太费电了。那包括这代的 M4 iPad 在游戏
This is motherboard testing. This is weird motherboard testing, weird spikes. I don't even deny that Mini LED can consume more power, but this is weird. Perhaps I'm incorrect. I thought it was for the device. Yeah, Samhain, I think you're actually correct here. I thought that if this was just for the chip, this would have been insane. And it would have proven all our theories right away. It still does to a degree, but not quite as aggressively if it does account for the entire device. But my God, why do we get... I really hope that they also have like chip-only game tests.
功耗上的优势，那可能有很大一部分是这个 OLED。
Yeah, he basically since he also talked about like the mini LED screen. Yeah, I already got
发热
it.
方面也是充满惊喜啊！测试结束之后呢，几台 M4 iPad Pro 的机身表面温度明显比 M2 机型来的更低啊，而且看热量分布的情况，机身散热也的确有所改进。那如果你还嫌这个热的话啊，可以把这个渲染精度开到最低，那这差不多就是手机级别的画质了。这种情况下呢 ，M4 的 iPad Pro 包括屏幕的整机功耗会降低到7瓦多啊。最高温度甚至不到40度啊！感觉我握着它啊，我的手甚至是在给它加热。这60帧下，原神一根直线的表现实在是太无聊了。所以我们直接让最高画质解锁了120帧，来看看这个状况下 M4 还能不能撑得住啊？事实证明，这个分辨率下的原神压力还是非常可怕的。解锁后的 M4 iPad Pro 在120帧下只能撑1分钟左右，然后会掉到80帧维持一段时间。那15分钟之后呢，随着机身热量逐渐累积，帧数也会慢慢掉到60到80帧之间波动啊。那事实证明，就算是 M4 啊，也很难在超过2K 的桌面分辨率下跑120帧。
Yeah, you should 2292 by 1579. You should probably make it run at around like a 1080p resolution. That would make a giant difference. But wait, why do we suddenly not have... Guys, do you see my utter disbelief? What happened here? Why do we not suddenly get 120 Hz results for any other device?
跑120帧的原神。那咱们再来看看崩坏星球铁道当中。
Wait, what kind of testing is that? What happened here? Look, this is the testing we got for where we don't actually test that much because the test gets like 60 FPS limited. Yet suddenly the much more interesting test that is for 120 FPS. Suddenly we don't test for DM2 devices. What happened?
M4 iPad Pro 在120帧下只能撑1分钟左右，然后会掉到80帧维持一段时间。那15分钟之后呢，随着机身热量逐渐累积，帧数也会慢慢掉到60到80帧之间波动啊。那事实证明，就算是 M4 啊，也很难在超过道当中的表现。那这次 M4 的3台 iPad Pro 也并没有扛。
Okay.
然，芯铁的压力还是要更高一些。那这次 M4 的3台 iPad Pro 也并没有扛住摧残啊。2台11寸的机器在测试开始10分钟左右就已经开始掉帧了，13寸呢稍微坚持久一点，但是呢到了15分钟左右，后面也还是得降频啊。那芯铁的测试成绩倒是可以非常容易看得出来 ，M4 的 GPU 在实际游戏当中。
M2 iPad Pro 37. Wait, but that's a huge leap. What's happening here? Guys, can somebody explain this to me? Why is the M2 iPad Air outperforming the M2 iPad Pro by like 60%? Zuboito, hello everyone. Nice of you to join, man. Guys, have been streaming for almost 2.5 hours. I do want to remind you to subscribe, to like the video, to share it out, to comment on it, and if you want to leave a small token of gratitude for the increasingly long content, please send a super chat or a super sticker. Um, yes. Yes, Sam Hein, I agree 100%. We should have like total system power usage, which is a relevant term, and then you couldn't even isolate for the display. But can somebody explain this to me?
相较于 M2
I have to turn off the subtitles again. What is going on with DM2? Are you telling me that the power draw of the display is so huge that it causes thermal throttling on the M2 iPad Pro, and then it causes it to lose way over 1/3 of its performance? I think if the mini LED screen is indeed a lot less efficient, it might be eating into the thermal dissipation budget of the iPad Pro. By that much? By 1/3?
提升幅度。那你可以看得出啊，
I mean, that's kind of like a reason to get the M2 iPad Air. Jan, right? You said you bought the M2 iPad Air instead of like a refurbished M2 iPad Pro. Well, now you are proven correct.
在整机功耗接近的情况下 ，M4
I need subtitles.
的 iPad Pro 平均帧数比起 M2 基本高了5%。
But it's not. The average frame rate is 50% higher versus this iPad, not versus this iPad.
50左右，还是非常强的。
Also, this would go against now. Wait, no, but this doesn't make sense either, because in the previous test,
看得出来左右后面热量这个分别20帧，
where
如果
were
你还
you?
来的更低些，是要提升点，比起上代使用 mini
Here,
LED
here, the M4 had about the same power consumption, right? While actually giving you more performance. So the Tandem OLED screen here seemed to be incredibly efficient if we account for all the other claims, right? Yet suddenly here, it delivers less average performance. But does it run it at a lower resolution? 2292 by 1718, that's for the iPad Pro, and then wait, what? Guys, I think the difference is the resolution target here. Can somebody briefly get me through this? Because here, they tested 2290 by 1718 for the M4 with its full core layout, and the M2 iPad Pro, but then not the M2 iPad Air? Is that like a limitation on the this comparison is completely worthless. If you're running at essentially less than half the resolution, because this is like a reduction of like 40% on each axis, this is a worthless test. And suddenly, am I wrong here? Am I seeing something wrong?
可以非常容易看得出来 ，M4 的 GPU 在实际游戏当中，相较于 M2，
Because so forget thermal throttling. The difference between the M2 comes down, and the other M2 comes down entirely to the power consumption, to the different resolutions. Of course, this runs it at basically twice the resolution of that. Let me briefly do the math. Right, 2290 times 1718, that's almost 4 megapixels, and then 1566 times 1080, that's 1.69 million pixels. That's like a full 2 megapixels less. What does this test supposed to show you? Then you exclude results like this.
看得出啊，在整机功耗接近的情况下 ，M4 的 iPad Pro 平均帧数比起
But yeah, if we normalize the workload, right? Because apparently those run at the same resolution, the iPad Pros. Now we see actually a huge gap, because if we actually compute that, that's 57.8 divided by 37. That's an increase of 56%. in average frame rate. That's huge.
M2基本高了50%左右，还是非常强的。
Yeah.
我也尝试了一下。
Guys, you guys didn't even think of that because it was so stupid. Of course, there are different benchmarks here.
铁解锁120帧的表现啊，那不愧是新铁啊，这压力实在是大的离谱。120帧下呢，也就撑了几秒钟，然后就迅速掉到了70到80帧。接着在机身热起来之后啊，后半程也维持不住60帧，这压力还是太难为 M4了。那么除了这
Those results actually look pretty good, given the support for variable refresh rate.
手游以外，不是已经有一些 PC 移植的3A 游戏上架 iPad 平台了吗？那咱们要不要也测测看呢？很遗憾啊，不管是《生化危机4》、《死亡搁浅》还是 COD 战区，那这些3A 游戏还并没有对 M4 iPad Pro 进行适配啊。
I mean, they will probably be soon.
那唯一能够跑的也就是《生化危机8》了，因为《生化危机8》可以非常方便的改到最高画质、原生分辨率。那其他几个游戏，你就算去改文件，其实也不生效。那即便是拉满了画质的《生化危机8》，我们似乎也遇到了卡功耗强的情况，明明帧数都没有跑到60帧啊，功耗。
Wait, but now we have 10.5 watts power usage. That goes way below what you claimed it uses.
耗却锁在了手机10瓦左右，可能是游戏开发者
it means that the actual device won't use more than 10.5 watts, even if it could get you higher. Well, have you considered that maybe 10.5 watts for GPU is kind of more of its actual power consumption, and that your results prior were kind of ridiculous nonsense?
设定了功耗键值，不过这样也好，可以保证长期不发热玩3A。那考虑到这个被动散热的机身，再加上这么低的功耗强 ，M4能够在2K 以上的分辨率上跑在接近50帧下，也是挺厉害的。那在 iPad 上玩这些3A 游戏啊，说实话更像主机，而不是像 PC。你下载下来就只管玩。 那画质选项正常都是不开放的。那这些3A 游戏
yeah, this is the first wave. I fully believe that like the next wave of AAA games on iPhone and iPad will allow you to much more freely choose between resolutions and stuff.
不太能榨干 iPad 的性能，这个是测试之前我没有想到的。那么这次在伦敦的 iPad Pro 发布会上啊，苹果很少见的提及了 iPad 的散热表现。 这两天各家的产品视频也出。
What do you mean? Rarely. Apple mentioned it during the keynote, and they said it's about 20% improved because it has graphene heat sheets on the actual processor and motherboard, and it has a copper Apple logo. How much more do you need? Like, there's so much weird, like, throwaway criticism here.
出了，你们也应该看到了，这次新 iPad 的确在机身里面做了一些散热上的改进。
Yeah, that's what Apple said. We've seen that in like the iFixit breakdown.
解热能力有没有提升呢
？Yes, by around 20%.
第一代 iPad Pro 这边 ，M4 的 iPad
no matter what you do, it's like, oh, what? Nah. I refuse to believe it. I refuse to believe that the M2 iPad Pro has almost better heat dissipation than the M4. It's like nothing matters. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Pro 无论是3+6还是4+6的型号，基本上持续的解热能力。
By the way, guys, I have even no idea. Can anybody tell me what are they testing here? Like, how do you test total heat dissipation from a device's body? From like a passively cooled product like this? How do you do it? How do you account what heat is dissipated and what is trapped or not? Also, by the way, heat capacity and stuff like that, it's not even like about total wattage. It's also about how you just dissipate it throughout the entire chassis. I think he might have meant in a rare move by Apple, they mentioned it. Oh, okay, yeah, that could have been it. But you see my problems with the video? The more smaller stuff like that keeps piling up, the more I am on edge. It's not like I don't want him to give the benefit of the doubt, but we have seen so many small issues that at this point I'm like, ooh.
都在13瓦左右，比起上代的10瓦左右呢，的确有着显著的进步。那13寸。
Wait. Oh, that is the 11-inch, but the 11-inch is supposedly much more improved than the 13-inch.
版本因为机身巨大，所以散热能力呢本来也不成问题。
But you just said it struggles to maintain 120 FPS. Now you're saying heat dissipation capacity is not a problem. Oh,
那新款的13寸 M4 iPad Pro 有着14瓦的解热能力，那也比起上代的13.5瓦略有提升啊。机身表面温度也低了1度多。那总的来说。
M4 42.3 43 versus M2 Pro 43.7. Is that really how they do it? Do they normalize for like the power consumption and then see how much it gives you like in terms of like backside heat? Because that would be a ridiculous way to measure it, or like a device like this.
说啊 M4 这台 iPad Pro 确实散热还不错，并不像 iPhone 那么拉垮。那么问题来了，苹果你们什么时候给 iPhone 赶紧升级
This year, I mean, we've already had like 500 rumors about it. The iPhones are getting the graphene heatsheet, the same one as on the iPad Pro. Maybe they're also getting the copper Apple logo on the Pros, who knows? And even the batteries are getting like metal casing.
一下散热啊？看到竞品一个一个往里面堆均热板，你们就不着急吗？那么最后一个最
I agree, question mark.
重要的问题是 M4 的 iPad Pro 续航如何呢？要知道，以往 iPad Pro 的续航几乎是用户吐槽最多的方面。
You must know that in the past, the battery life of the iPad Pro was almost the aspect that users complained about the most. I mean, I have an iPad Pro. I guess battery life could be higher, but it's not something I would complain about. Maybe if you ask me what could be improved the most, I would probably say battery life because performance is great, screen is great, and I guess battery life is good, but not great. But is that really a complaint?
所以对 iPad Pro 来说，最大的考验其实就是续航。考虑到我们用平板的应用场景
Wait, that's all the games they tested? They haven't done normalized testing in 120 FPS workloads? No, this cannot be. Look, once again, 120 FPS, I believe this was Honkai Star Rail. No other iPads included. Where was it? Genshin Impact, 120 FPS. They show it for so quickly.
性能上分布渲染 iPad 5分钟之后
Here, Genshin Impact, 120 FPS, no iPad. Guys, I'm not saying they need to test 120 FPS because that like is the truth and we need 120 FPS. What 120 FPS will avoid us hitting the 60 FPS lock. This is how you test games. No, it cannot be this bad. Oh my god, their GPU tests are completely worthless. How was it better when they tested iPhones? What happened? Is it because iPad games are like locked to relatively low resolutions, most of them, that they didn't bother testing them?
上代的10瓦左右呢，的确有着显著的进步。从满电中，这就是续航。考虑到我们用平板的应用场景是比较单一且持续时间较长的，所以这次 iPad 的续航测试，我们是每2小时一个循环。那包括浏览20分钟 IT 之家、打原神40分钟，以及看 B 站视频1小时，从满电一直循环测到没电，屏幕亮度呢则维持在视频1小时。从满电
cycle is measured from full power to no power.
测到没电。屏幕亮度呢则维持在300尼特。那么测试结果非常令人意外啊 ！M4 的 iPad Pro 续航比起上代
M2 iPad Pro at 3.5 hours? What? Oh, well, that's their mixed use case thing, but this is... Guys, I know... Oh my god, everything they show is weird. The good thing about Geekerwan is they're the only ones doing tests like Spec. The bad thing about them is they seem to have no methodology or coherent strategy. Guys, you cannot tell me, like... Guys, battery life has not doubled from the M2 iPad Pro. It has improved, probably by a lot, but it has not doubled. This is so weird. Also, by the way, there's like apparently much better efficiency on this device with one fewer P cores. Great. I mean, that does actually make sense, but he did call that out prior. M2 11-inch model. What did they do? What did they do with the mini LED screen? I never have those issues on my mini LED screen, and I do play games on it. What happened there? It's not that inefficient. That's not like you can, and it's not even like an Apple defense. You can test out like mini LED like TVs and desktops. Yes, they consume a lot of power once you push them to like HDR workloads and stuff like that, but not in like 300 nits SDR stuff.
有了巨大的提升，尤其是13寸版本，续航成绩相比 M2
I forgot I don't know Chinese.
的 iPad Pro 近乎得到了翻倍啊！11寸的版本也有不小的提升。那至于 M2 的 iPad Air 呢，它的续航则介于 M4 的 iPad Pro 和 M2 的 iPad Pro 之间。那这代 iPad Pro 的续航完全是出乎我意料的，因为苹果官网标定的续航甚至并没有什么变化。那我们实际的应用测试当中怎么会强这么多呢？它们芯片之间的能耗差距也没有这么大。
No, this is wrong. The energy consumption gap between their chips is that big. It's just your stupid methodology does not allow you to understand it. Geez, like, come on, you cannot take like, have you watched Apple's event? Have you seen Apple claim that M4 uses M2, gives you M2 performance at half the power, which by the way, this would actually line up with this benchmark, with this battery life test. Like, you cannot tell me that you actually don't believe that M4 is not that much more efficient than M2.
那其实对于平板来说啊，影响续航的除了芯片的能效以外
They will talk about the screen, whatever.
我们来做一个很简单的测试。
I am done
在300
here.
英寸的屏幕亮度下，播放 B 站视频，测量一下平均功耗。那结果很明显啊，上代 M2 12.9寸 iPad Pro。
But you see, those differences aren't actually double. They don't line up anymore with those other tests. It would have to consume about at least like 9 watts to make sense with those other tests. Because if the CPU is not actually that much more efficient, then that percentage doesn't make sense.
视频的功耗可以说是鹤立鸡群的高啊，这就是 Mini LED 存在的最大问题，它的功耗实在是太高了，而且由于它的背光是动态调整的，那如果你经常浏览网页或者打字，白色显示区域比较多的话，它的耗电量只会更高。那这代 OLED 的屏幕的确是显著降低了整机功耗啊，再配合上芯片的能效进步，最终就让 M4 的 iPad Pro 在续航方面有了巨大的改善。那做完 M4 的评测啊，我最大的感慨就是苹果的确努力了。但似乎我们人类的半导体技术确实要望到头了。
Oh god, yeah, oh god, this is so cringe. Oh my god, they will now be saying that N3E is almost a dead end for semiconductors.
记得7纳米时代的时候 ，A12、A12 X、865、Zen 2、Zen 3，个个都比起自己的前代产品有着巨大的提升。
Which is funny because Zen 2 and Zen 3 were built on the same node, and it was hugely more energy efficient. Right? Am I wrong? What is this dude blabbering on about at this point? Zen 2 node. 7nm MOSFET node from TSMC, 7nm basically. Zen 3 node. This comes when you actually are able to recollect stuff. TSMC's... Wait, what? No, it's 7nm. 7nm, and then eventually it was switched to 6. So, and we got Zen 3 efficiency versus Zen 2. Zen 3 has 19% higher instructions per cycle. IPC is not the same as efficiency. 10% faster clocks, 20% more work done on the same clock. Power consumption. Just so I can prove to you guys how much I know about the PCMR race. Going back to our previous Zen 2, we were only seeing a peak of 18. Again, peak wattage, but this is an Antec. 1.45 volts for Zen 2, 1.42 for Zen 3. How much more efficient is it? Performance per watt? Guess cannot show it. 5600X drew a little over 10% less power than the 3600, despite being much faster. So if that is correct, then that's really, really good. That says that you can get a lot of efficiency even without node jumps. Another example of deciding on a conclusion and engineering the test to prove it. Yeah, I feel like they've already been like very subsumed by the idea that like node jumps will get smaller and smaller, and they just refuse to accept that the architecture can make the difference. YouTube Kulanchizi is saying that's power consumption measured when watching a 4K video at 300 nits. The battery life results are for mixed usage, and that's why the power consumption difference don't exactly match. No. If you actually go by average, by their numbers, not by our numbers, because we understand that M4 is way more efficient than M2. But if their improvement for the chip is only like what 5%, 10%, even 20%, right? Yes, there will be scenarios where you have like a white web page, and apparently to them that's when mini LED consumes 3-4 times the energy. That doesn't make sense. That would cause the iPad Pros to also run really hot, but whatever. But to us, those numbers make sense. I actually fully agree with YouTube Kalanjis, but not to them, right? To them, those numbers cannot make sense, because if you believe that there's such a small improvement from the CPU, then those numbers from the display would have to be incredibly different. They would have to be like 4 times different at some point or whatever. And that to me is just so weird, because why is it so difficult to accept that the CPU also really is more efficient? Maybe not at its absolute highest clock speed, but it won't be hitting 4.4 gigahertz all of the time. It doesn't need to. Certain tasks are like certain web browsing stuff, for example, is already more constrained by what is it called, when like the timing stuff from like the server and whatever. Like this idea that like, oh, it's all thanks to the screen. I mean, that probably makes sense if you assume the screen is 3-4 times more efficient or whatever, but it just doesn't make whatever. Like I think I've said it time and time again that their numbers are weird. Again, I do understand you, because yes, to me also some of those results make sense if you probably really isolate for a specific use case, like mixed use case with what they have done, and it happens to be one that really benefits, like OLED versus mini LED. I fully understand it. And of course at low brightness, I assume tandem OLED probably really destroys almost every other tech in terms of energy efficiency, but it does account for some efficiency from the CPU, at least to me, because I know that the CPU is more efficient, and he doesn't, because for one, he had done a lot of tests with M3, which already was on 3 nanometer, and which was already a newer architecture than on M2, which already had like also like the new GPU and stuff like that. But once you compare it to M2, you saw that like the efficiency gains there were like 10-15%, and they are way more than that. That's what I'm trying to say. And I'm also really tired because we are approaching the 3-hour mark.
5纳米时代的 A15 8/2 4090
Again, 8 Gen 2 was a big node jump. Actually, 8 Gen 2 was not the impressive part. The impressive part was the 8 plus Gen 1, which was their switch to TSMC. The 4090 is an almost undescribable gap from Samsung 8 nanometer, which is like an evolution of their 10 nanometer node, versus TSMC's N4 node, which is an evolution of their 5 nanometer node. So you have like 2.5 nodes in between. So the 4090 does not leave a deep impression on you if you actually know about architectures. This was actually where the vast majority of the efficiency gains came primarily from the jump in nodes. It did not come from a very advanced architecture.
也给我们留下了深刻的印象。但当台积电的工艺制程终于进化到了3纳米节点，似乎连着2代的制程，留给我们的都只有失望。 作为第一颗 N3E 的处理器啊 ，M4 拥有业界最先进的处理器架构，只隔了半年时间，居然再次优化了 M3 上的新架构。N3E 呢，也的确让新处理器获得了更高的频率上限，但这是有代价的。你会看到
But which cost? Again, which cost for the actual device, though? It's
M4 在追求极限性能的路上，似乎带上了英特尔的影子。还记得当年的酷睿2正是以一骑绝尘的能效优势席卷了那个时代。那几年前呢，苹果用 M1 的能效比征服了轻薄本，改变了 PC 行业的思路。但随着时间的推移啊，曾经能耗比优秀的酷睿2，最终却进化成了如今的大火炉酷睿 i。
I mean, yeah, but things are also like differently evaluated for its time. Like
1490K
7950X 3D, yeah, that runs at a lower clock speed, but it does use the higher IPC because it has more cache. Yeah, 350 watts is not really like very representative of the 4900 KS or K. It's probably lower than that, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely high usage, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's Cinebench, but it's Cinebench R23. Where is Cinebench 2024? What is going on? Are those not their results? Did they just take results that happened to be out there, maybe like by Hardware Unboxed or Hardware Canucks or something like that, or LTT?
那苹果的 M 系列处理器未来也会走这样的路吗？我无法预知未来啊，但我知道通过更激进的功耗预算来提升性能的路是有尽头的。就 M4 而言，我认为它达到了 Mac 平台的甜点频率，它应该足以将未来的 Mac。
But it doesn't just reach the sweet spot for Macs. It's apparently good enough for a 5.1 millimeter thick iPad. What are you talking about?
一个非常强的性能级别，但 M4 的强大对于目前的 iPad Pro 来说。
But the power of M4 may mean the most to the current iPad Pro. Just a few more years of use. What?
那现在呢，离 WWDC 也已经很近了。希望在 WWDC 上，我们能够看到 iPad Pro 真正的。
Okay, and now we get like stupid points as always about iPad needing more.
利用上 M4 的性能。那如果只是为了多用几年而已，那 iPad 的未来，我觉得并不会因为 M4。
And I don't think the future of iPad will be brighter. Again, Apple sells way more iPads than Macs. They sold 12 million iPads last quarter, despite not having new iPads for well over a year. So I think that you can shut up with your prediction about the iPad's future, and it's doing just fine, believe me.
的到来而更加光明。好了，以上就是本期节目的全部内容了。我们这期节目做的真的非常的不容易。如果你喜欢我们节目，别忘了点赞键来个素质3连，也。
What?
节目做的真的非
It's
常的不容易。
really not easy for us to do this program.
如果你喜欢我们节目，
If you like our program,
点赞键来个素
don't
质3。
forget to press and hold the like button to give us a threesome. Wait, why can't I move? Oh, this is just subtitles. I thought this was just dynamically the way Apple does text recognition. Guys, I don't want to give them a threesome. I don't want them to use my thumbs up for a threesome.
3连也千万不要忘记关注我们的频道。
Nope, I will not dislike it because I got to use their content. My God, did I not like this. And we are now approaching the 3-hour mark. I think I will discuss like the aftermath of this review, maybe in some other live stream, because it is getting way too long in the tooth at this point. YouTube Kalanchisi, you're laughing at the threesome joke. Yeah, it's really weird because I see the kernel of something good. And YouTube Kulanchizi, let me know what you think of this video because you were the one to suggest it yesterday, and I I took it to heart, and this is why I'm here, and this is why I've been analyzing this video for now close to 3 hours. And everybody who's watching this, please consider subscribing. Do all the threesome stuff apparently. Do all the YouTube jazz, as I call it. I think that's a little bit more family friendly. Please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Comment on the videos. Of course, share them out with friends who you think might enjoy this type of content. And as always, please think of leaving a super chat or a super sticker. As I said in the beginning of the video, this money will go directly into obtaining a new microphone for this channel. So it will go directly into your quality of life experience. And beyond that, as always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next.
频道，我们马上
Yeah, he's finished. I'm basically finished. Again, as I've said, there's some good stuff here. Their methodology seems very weird. I mean, they have a ton of subscribers and very active ones, I believe. Like most of their videos get like 25% of the overall channel engagement, right? It's like really good. Mine get like less than 10% or something like that. Some videos got like 0.2%, but that was because I was talking about the Google I/O and seemingly nobody freaking cared. Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 3, MacBook Air M3. When did they review the MacBook Air? Oh, because, yeah, the MacBook Air, right. But they did have like the MacBook Pro. You see, they talked about the Snapdragon X Elite here. The iPhone. What are their most popular videos? The M1? I have no idea what any of this is. I assume this is like maybe some crazy cooling experiment. The 13, this is a Threadripper part. This is the 9000S chip. Wait, what? Is it that new? Is it just 8 months old? I assumed that it would be way older. Then we have so basically M1, M2 together makes like 2 million views. We have Steam Deck. We have the Snapdragon 888, yeah, which can run pretty hot. M1 Max, M1 iPad Pro, RTX 3080, their Titan cards. So Apple seems to be a big part of what like drives like really high peaks, but it's not exclusively so. They also get plenty of views for other things, just less consistently so. You see, this is like older videos. So I can definitely understand why they feel like they need to analyze Apple stuff, and obviously they do analyze other stuff as well. Here's the Switch. So yeah, it's interesting because it feels like, but yeah, if we just go to newest, I assume that would give us like, yeah, this is a more traditional, like 4070 Ti, 4080. So they do like all the PCMR stuff, like just reviewing GPUs. And then they do have a focus on reviewing smartphones. And this is where they seemingly get a lot of views. Like this is where like the Dimensity 9300 has like 40% more views than an RTX 4070. And then like an Gen 3 in the ROG Pro has like double the views of the RTX 4080 Super. So they seem to be somewhat mobile focused, which feels weird that they make like this weird statements about how the M4 will be like drastically different in a MacBook than it is in an iPad, because that's not at all how Apple has behaved. Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much more to say. I think their power consumption metrics is what gets me the most because it just feels the weirdest. It just feels very much like it has very, very little relation to reality until they get to actual games. And then I wonder why they haven't why they don't seem to understand that their artificial numbers don't make any sense once you consider their like real world numbers. Yeah, so basically we don't yet have basically an average for the M4. Wait, I clicked on Max. I would have to go to iOS benchmark charts. Yeah, still no M4, unfortunately. But yeah, basically, I am wrapping this up. I just wanted to briefly check something that I hadn't checked in a while. So basically, if the averages of the M4 changed in any way, because they are getting like 4,000 single core tests. A lot of tests are showing it more 37, high 3700s, low 3800s, which I assume could also be part of that like 4.5 gigahertz versus 4.4 in some of the power consumption, but I don't think it explains enough, to be honest. So yeah, this was the Geekerwan M4 iPad Pro review, or basically more of a performance analysis of the M4. You also can see just how many views it got in just a day. They do have an English channel, but they don't update it as often. The last one we actually did watch on the channel. I do want to very briefly go to it, because when we go to GPU efficiency, are we testing
GPU? Both my friends and MiHoYo, we managed to get our hand-ish artifact fully better than the iPhone 14 improvement. However, so
okay,
efficiency
here we actually had we had real results. Now this was versus the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, not Gen 3. But we did have results where you see how much less power the iPhone used, and that it actually got super close to maxing out 60 frames per second. I wanted to see a couple of charts like this, but on the iPad, but for some reason we got weird disparities in tested resolutions, and then we got 120 hertz results that didn't include any other iPads, which makes me question, do those other iPads not support 120 hertz? And why did he not mention that, if that's the case? Because that would be a decent excuse, at least.
in these screens shrinks massively. I would say, apart from Genshin Impact into iPhone price compromising to our tested, the current
version, yeah, right. They support
requires at least 6 gigs of RAM. With 6 gigs, you may still get occasional crashes after a long time gaming. Conserve FPS. I guess they did that for.
This is where they compared it against the Steam Deck, right? Yeah, the Steam Deck was running at 15 watts, which, by the way, the Steam Deck running at 15 watts for its SoC really should tell you a lot about the wattage of the iPhone, because the iPhone is not actively cooled. It's way smaller. So this idea that the iPhone gets anywhere close to the power consumption of a Steam Deck, because some of their results show 7, 9, 8 watts instead of 4 or 5, it should already give you some reason to pause.
Resident Evil Village isn't far behind handheld gaming PCs like Steam Deck or ROG Ally. With adequate cooling, the A17 Pro can achieve 44 FPS, roughly half the performance of a GTX.
But also, the A17 Pro can also achieve more power than a Steam Deck at 15 watts, which is insane. Now, yes, of course, it has to thermal throttle soon after, and then it basically normalizes at around 30 frames. But yeah, it's a good GPU. It's what I'm trying to tell people. It's a good GPU. So regardless, I am finished here. This was a fun video. I do want to thank anyone who joined. This was an extremely long one. I will try to keep my future streams shorter, but I do hope you guys got something out of it. And I do once again recommend for you to ask of you to do all the YouTube jazz. But for now, I am saying goodbye and saying big thank you for tuning in. And please let me know in the comments what you thought of that video. It's very good for the algorithm. And what you would like to see me cover next, because as YouTube Colin Chizzy can confirm, I do listen to suggestions in the comments. Thank you guys so much. It's been a long one, but it's been a fun one. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.